This page is the front cover of the N64 Magazine. It's issue 28 from May 1999, costing £2.95, which wasn't cheap back then. It's shouting about being the UK's best-selling independent Nintendo mag, and boasts 148 pages. The main image is Duke Nukem from 0 Hour, proclaiming himself king as you do, I suppose. It's the world's first ever review, they're saying, so they were pretty chuffed about that. Below Duke, there's a few headlines. Resident Evil is mentioned, saying first N64 pictures, which would have been interesting to see how that was shaping up on the console. Then Star Wars Phantom Menace shots. Everyone was hyped for that film at the time. Even if the game ended up being a bit naff, everyone wanted to see anything Phantom Menace related. And Shadow Man with shocking new details. That game was a bit darker and grittier, wasn't it? They're pushing that there's a free Game Boy magazine inside too. Must have been trying to get the handheld gamers interested as well. Yeah, typical magazine cover from back then, packed with promises and exciting headlines to grab your attention at the newsagents. This page of N64 Magazine starts off with a big welcome and tells you how massive the magazine is, 148 pages no less, bragging about being Britain's biggest and best-selling Nintendo mag, and then it goes on to explain why you should buy it. They're saying they don't just give out Star Game Awards willy-nilly, they actually play the games properly first to make sure they're good, which is fair enough. They also bang on about being independent from Nintendo so they can give honest reviews, even if a game is rubbish, which again you'd hope so. And because they're independent, apparently they get games early from Japan and America, so you know what's worth looking out for. The main focus of the mag is N64 games you can actually buy here in the UK, not just Japanese stuff no one here can play. They've got correspondents in Europe, Japan and America to get first-hand news. And they don't just copy stuff from the internet, which was a new thing back then, the internet. They reckon they're the most experienced Nintendo fans in the business, and pack every page with useful info and advice. And they finish off with a warning not to be fooled by feeble imitations, which is a bit dramatic. Then there's a section called, Your Face, Your Ass, What's the Difference? Which is a bit of a weird headline if you ask me. It's about Duke Nukem, 0 Hour. And the reviewer is talking about how good it is, even though he admits he's not exactly ripped like Duke. He's impressed with the amount of sampled speech in it, and says it's an excuse for some good one-liners. He also mentions reviews of Resident Evil and Star Wars Episode 1, Racer, saying they are looking astonishing and promising to be blockbusters. Plus there's Snowboard Kids 2, and Harvest Moon being reviewed, and they even mention their Game Boy mag. Apparently they did some experiment where they tried to get a free games rack worth £2.95, and ended up buying N64 Magazine instead, which is a roundabout way of saying buy the magazine, I suppose. Tim Weaver, the editor, signs off with happy hunting. Below that, there's a bit on how to use your free N64 games rack, which you got free with the magazine, saying just rip off the backing board and fill it with games. There's pictures of people with the game rack, looking pleased with themselves, and at the bottom it says to flip to page 146 for a full index of the month's contents. It's the May 1999 issue, apparently. This page of the N64 Magazine, issue 28 from May 99, it's the contents page showing what's inside. Right at the front we've got Planet 64, the news section, kicking off on page 12. Sounds like they're covering Metroid, some new consoles, and Resident Evil 2, which was massive back then, proper scary stuff on the telly. Blimey, they even got a photo of Miyamoto, the big cheese himself. Warrington knew. Then there's a coming soon bit, page 16, teasing a bunch of games. Marines Command & Conquer, Harrier 2001, Road Rash 64, bit of a mixed bag there, eh? Command & Conquer on the N64, that was a weird one, felt more at home on the PC if you ask me, but Road Rash 64, now that could be a laugh. Regulars section lists the usual features, like information station for release dates, Englishman in Tokyo, sounds like Max is off, maybe he's finally had enough of Japanese telly, an N64 shopper, for imports, essential back then, and What If, with Bill Oddie. That's a bit random, isn't it? Over to the right is N64 Arena, their review section, starting on page 52. Duke Nukem, 0 Hour is getting a review, apparently it's even better than before, we'll see about that. Then All-Star Baseball 2000, wondering if it's actually any different from the last one. And Vigilante 8, cars, flares and plenty of guns, sounds like a right laugh, probably a bit daft but good fun with your mates. Import Arena, on page 68, that's where it gets interesting. Snowboard Kids 2. Looked a bit childish if you ask me. California Speed, frankly rubbish racing, haha. Straight to the point then, Load Runner 3D, bit of an old school platformer in 3D, might be alright for a bit of retro fun. Smash Bros. US, so they're still banging on about that, saying it's still top even in English. Well yeah, of course it is, everyone knows Smash Bros. Is amazing. And lastly, Harvest Moon, a quirky Japanese farming sim, never got into those myself, seemed a bit slow-paced for my liking, but each to their own. And at the bottom, Planet Game Boy, their Game Boy section, 16 pages of it apparently, kicking off on page 35, loads of Ace Games coverage they reckon, must be something good in there for the handheld fans. That's the lot then, looks like a decent issue, might be worth a read if you're stuck for something to do on the bog. This page is a look ahead in the magazine, right at the front, page 5. So we're getting a future look at upcoming N64 games. This Shadow Man, they're teasing some terrifying development details for that one, which sounded pretty dark and gritty at the time compared to a lot of the colourful stuff on the N64. Then there's WWF Attitude, promising some beat-em-up supremacy, which probably meant more of the same wrestling madness. And Star Wars Episode 1. Racer with exclusive picks that was massive back then. Everyone was hyped for anything Star Wars Episode 1 related, even if the film itself turned out a bit jaw. Well, you know. The big feature on this page is Duke Nukem 0 Hour. They're calling it the first EVR review, and saying it's got more guns, more guts, and more pigs. Sounds like classic Duke, bit crude, but we lapped it up back then. Looks like they reckon Duke is back in style. There's a multiplayer compo at Virgin Megastores, chance to be the best multiplayer gamer in the country, which probably meant Mario Kart or GoldenEye down at the local game shop. And something about World Driver Championship being GT on the N64, which was a bold claim. They say you won't believe your eyes, so they must be impressed with the graphics. Down the side there's the contents listed, standard magazine stuff. N64 Club 64 inches is the reader service section, with things like mailbox, how-to, guides for games like Wipeout 64 and FIFA 99, help wanted for Zelda and GoldenEye secrets, tips extra, Dr. Kit's game clinic, hotline tips, mutant results, I'm the best for league tables, Skill Club 64, contacts to make mates, directory for game reviews, subs and back issues. Pretty much everything you expect in a gaming mag from back then. Oh, and it's dated May 1999. Good times. This page in N64 Magazine, right, it's having a gander at some upcoming games, calling it a future look section. They're showing off Shadow Man first, saying it's a right old gore fest, and giving it a 6. Seems like it's trying to be a bit edgy, all that blood and guts. Then there's WWF Attitude, wrestling, back on the N64 but in astonishing hires apparently. They've slapped an 8 on that, so must be a decent grappler. And then, big news, Star Wars Episode 1 Racer. Blimey, the very first shots ever, they're shouting, and giving it a perfect 10, saying it's unbelievable. Bit keen, aren't they? But yeah, pod racing, that's gonna be a big deal, Warner Racer. The main thing they're banging on about here though is a game called SHAD. Looks a bit grim, doesn't it? One screenshot has some bloke wandering around in his jeans with no shirt and they reckon you'd think he'd be cold. Fair point. Apparently when you start the game you can see this church in the distance, like Death Mountain in Zelda, which is a bold comparison. Another one is a bloke in a dungeony looking place with torches and they are saying the camera's completely customizable, and yoiks, plenty of blood. Right then. They also mention plenty of hazards and sludge will kill you, and one of the screenshots is of some dodgy looking bat creature, saying enemies are rife and grotesque beyond belief. A bit like Tim. Cheeky sods whoever Tim is. They also ponder if one of the enemies is a boss or just a statue. Sounds like your typical dark and moody action game, a bit of blood, a bit of shooting, all that jazz. This page right then, it's a look at Shadow Man, shaping up to be one of the big N64 games of '99 apparently. They're saying work's steaming ahead at Iguana UK in Stockton, which is good to hear, especially as they are promising monthly updates in the mag until it's out, kicking off with a first review in August. So Shadow Man. It's about Mike Leroy, this chap hunted by a voodoo princess to take down some undead mob called the Five and their boss, some infernal geezer. Sounds a bit moody, doesn't it? They mention you get to explore both live side and dead side, twisting versions of our world, and the playing areas are supposedly massive, proper Zelda-scale exploration, which is a bold claim. Equipment you find lets you revisit places and get to new areas. Classic stuff. Deadside's got this massive tower, Legion's Gaff, which is the center of it all, and portals to Liveside where these 5 blokes are hiding out, all based on villains from books, films, and real life apparently, serial killers and all sorts, cheery stuff. They even claim they used actual FBI casebooks for research. Blimey. There's a screenshot of Shadow Man looking a bit worse for wear, and a caption suggesting the developers might be a bit rough in the mornings too. They reckon it's got puzzle solving, non-linear adventuring, character interaction and flesh-ripping combat, quite a mix. And they've gone for a 256 meg cart for the N64 version, which is a big step up from the planned 128 meg, apparently to keep all the speech in. They're saying it's pushed the release back a bit, maybe from what was planned, but reckon it'll be worth the wait. There's a bit about schisms, portals from the asylum to live side, open by ripping open rotting torsos with a retractor, nice. And Jaunty, one of your allies, guards the asylum gates and gives advice. He's human in live side, but in dead side, he's a skull-faced snake in a top hat. Right then, release-wise, it's August for both the UK and the US, according to the little info box. So yeah, Shadowman. Sounds dark, disturbing, grotesque, all the usual for the time, doesn't it? They're promising more next month. To be continued then. This page is about the new WWF game, Attitude, the follow-up to Warzone. Seems like Iguana, the developers, actually listened to fans this time around, spending ages going through letters and emails, fair play to them. Apparently Warzone was alright but a bit shallow for proper grapple fans, especially compared to the WCW games back then. Not enough moves, or maybe too easy to pull them off, and only 15 wrestlers, which was a bit stingy when WCW/NWO Revenge had loads more. Creator play was a bit rubbish too apparently. But Attitude is supposed to fix all that. They've doubled the wrestlers, so 30 grapplers this time, including some old favourites, which is decent. They're banging on about how realistic the wrestlers look, even down to the fat noggins and bellies bounce. Charming. There are screenshots dotted about. You can see Stone Cold versus Shawn Michaels, The Rock going at it with someone, Goldust looking a bit creepy as always, and Undertaker being, well, Undertaker. There's even Chyna and Sable in there, which is a first for a WWF game, on the N64 if I remember rightly. They've even got little captions with quotes, some are a bit cheesy, like, mankind, ugly, fat, and smelly, and gah, I will rip out your, got a fisherman's friend, bit daft if you ask me. Main improvements seem to be loads more moves, over 400 apparently, and they've all got their own entrance music and signature tunes, plus a unique exit where they can brawl in the crowd. Sounds a bit more like the wrestling we actually watch, doesn't it? Rogo. So yeah, WWF Attitude. Looks like it could be a decent step up from Warzone. Twice as many wrestlers and loads more moves, you can't really complain about that, can you? Might be worth a look when it comes out. This page in N64 Mag is having a look at WWF Attitude, and it seems like they are well impressed. It's all about the creative player mode, which they reckon is miles better than Warzone. You can tweak everything from your wrestler's nose to their, ankles. Apparently you can even scribble on their t-shirts, which sounds like a laugh. There are a few screenshots dotted about, showing off the wrestlers like Val Venis in his, shall we say, interesting silver pants, and Road Dogg and Val Venis facing off. Goldust is pulling an Elvis pose, while Kane and Bossman are looking a bit moody. Undertaker and Goldust are there too. They're saying the graphics are sharper if you've got the expansion pack, which is fair enough, and that the wrestlers' faces actually move properly now, and their bellies wobble when you smack them. Charming. They're banging on about commentary from Jerry Lawler and Shane McMahon, and a load of new weapons nicked from Turok 2. Sounds a bit bonkers, doesn't it? Apparently there are loads of new play modes too. They seem to think it's a good step up from Warzone, and they're looking forward to giving it a proper review in a couple of months. It's coming out in June in the US and here in the UK as well. So yeah, WWF Attitude, coming soon. This page in N64 Magazine is having a gander at the upcoming Star Wars Episode 1 Racer game. Right then, pod racing, eh? Well, it was a big deal at the time of Phantom Menace, wasn't it? They've got these first ever pics splashed all over the page, showing off the graphics, which, to be fair, look pretty nippy for the N64. They are pointing out little things in the screenshots, like how fast it seems to be running and some of the track designs, saying some bits are indoors and most are outdoors, and there's even one that looks like a Cloud City sort of place. Bit like Wipeout in Star Wars, maybe? They reckon the pod racers themselves are quite something, being held together by some purple energy beam apparently. The review blurb is talking about how everyone was going bonkers for Star Wars again back then with the new film, and this game is based on that pod race scene from Phantom Menace. They mention there are 8 racers to pick from, each with their own pod, and that it's all supposed to be super fast and action-packed, comparing it to Wipeout 64 and F-Zero X, which were already pretty rapid games back in the day on the N64. It does say, it's all about this pod racing tournament set up by Jabba the Hutt, and even mentions young Anakin Skywalker being a racer. Looks like it was slated for a May release in the US and July here in the UK, with a little rating of 1/2 at the top. Not entirely sure what that means, maybe a first impressions score? Anyway, that's Star Wars Episode 1. Racer. Looks fast, looks Star Warsy, could be a decent racer if you were into that sort of thing at the time. This page in N64 Magazine back in May '99 is all about Star Wars Episode 1, Racer, as you can probably guess from the massive yellow letters. It's having a proper look at this new pod racing game tied in with that Episode 1 film that was on the horizon. Everyone was talking about it. They're banging on about how good it looks, and yeah, fair play. The screenshots do look pretty decent for the N64 at the time, all whizzy and impressive. There's a bit where they're quoting Anakin Skywalker. Bit cheesy, but what do you expect? Apparently you need to do the Bunte training course, which sounds like a right pain. And some other bloke is saying steer clear of canyon walls, helpful advice that. There's a bit about the names of the racers, like eBay Endocott, Gazgano, Ellen Mack, and blokes called Aldar Bedo and Clegg Holdfast. Sounds like a right bunch of made UP nonsense, doesn't it? They even joke they sound like a sci-fi convention guest list. It mentions this game is supposed to be like what you see in the film. And it'll all make sense when the film comes out in May. The main article is saying it's looking different from other N64 racers, which is probably a good thing. They're going on about hires, graphics, and sampled sound, and how they're squeezing it all onto the cartridge. Apparently they're aiming for 30 frames per second, which was alright back then. They talk about banking around corners, motion sickness, and crashing into walls. Sounds like a laugh, maybe. It's set over 8 worlds, with different tracks, shortcuts, and loads of characters, 8 to start with and loads more to unlock. And you can upgrade your pod racer. They're promising to cover it more next month, so looks like they're gonna keep an eye on it. The next page in this issue, yeah, this one is about Metroid. Metroid returns, it shouts. Big and bold across the top, typical magazine style, eh? It's issue 28 from May 1999 of Planet 64, right when everyone was buzzing about what was next for the N64 orchestra. So yeah, Metroid, the article says, it's true, Samus is on her way back and now in full 3D. Classic bit of hype from the magazine, wasn't it? They're saying that Nintendo fans were chuffed to hear that Shigeru Miyamoto confirmed a new Metroid game was in development for the N64. They mention it's a brand new Metroid game, which was good news, as it had been a while since Super Metroid on the SNES, which they rightly call one of the best games ever. They're speculating about what the game will be like. They think it might reuse the Zelda engine from Ocarina of Time. They mention Shigeru Miyamoto saying he wants Nintendo to get better at using existing tech to speed up game development, as these big games were taking ages to make back then. Like 3 years, they said. Imagine. The article reckons we can expect to see 3D versions of Metroid's usual stuff. Futuristic environments, massive weapons, and Mother Brain causing trouble again. There are a couple of screenshots. One at the top shows some 2D Metroid action, looks like Super Metroid maybe, and then another one below it. They've even got a little picture of Samus Aran herself, in her suit, looking all orange and ready for action. Down the side, there's the usual magazine stuff, editor's details, subscription info for UK and Europe, and the date for the next issue, Tuesday the 18th of April. And of course the N64 Magazine logo at the bottom of the page, with issue 28 inches, just to remind you what you're reading. Nothing too groundbreaking on this page really, just the usual games magazine fare, but about Metroid on the N64, which, yeah, was quite exciting at the time. This page of the magazine, blimey, it's all about the future, isn't it? Right then, kicking off with a snippet about IS-99, or GQ J-League Perfect Striker 2 as it's known in Japan. Sounds like Konami are nearly done with it, and it's got some new success mode. Fair enough for footy fans, I suppose. Then there's a big piece called Future Nintendo. Seems old Shigeru Miyamoto himself has been chatting about their next console. Apparently he's well into designing the controller already. Remember all the fuss about the N64 controller? He reckons they always get it right first time. He even says the N64 pad was made with Mario 64 in mind. Blimey. There's a daft artist drawing of what the new console might look like. Looks a bit like a futuristic drinks dispenser to me. They haven't even built a prototype yet apparently, so don't hold your breath. Over on the right, City Central is about SimCity 64. Remember SimCity 64? Apparently Japan only got SimCity 2000 on the SNES. Mental, isn't it? Anyway, this one's 3D polygon graphics and coming out towards the end of the year in cartridge form. Wacy. Then there's a bit about Sky's the Limit. Apparently that Pokemon cartoon that gave all those Japanese kids seizures, with the flashing lights, is coming to Sky One. Good grief. It's on in the morning after Godzilla and The Simpsons, and then again in the afternoon. Probably best to watch that with the lights on, eh? And finally, N64 Resi-Do. Resident Evil 2 is coming to the N64. First screenshots and all that, Capcom confirmed it. They mention it's a keyword conversion, meaning cartridge, but reckon it'll be alright. The team doing it, Angel Studios, are getting help from Rogue Squadron lot, and Factor 5 for the sound. Impressive. Sounds like they are going to squeeze pre-rendered intros onto the cart somehow using clever tricks. Gameplay-wise, they're adding hidden minigames, you can adjust the violence level, and there's a randomizer for items, and a scrapbook thing that changes the story as you play. Sounds like they're trying to pack it all in. More next month apparently. Excited are we? Maybe a bit. This page has got a section called Fanzine Farm. Seems like they're reviewing or mentioning fanzines that readers have sent in. There's one called Retro Classics, which sounds like it's dedicated to old school gaming, talking about things like Spectrum and Commodore, real retro stuff. They mention a feature on Arcadia and Zoom. Anyone remember those? Golgay. Then there's a new goods section, which is the usual stuff, bits and bobs for the N64. Zelda figures from Japan are mentioned, little collectibles, probably from vending machines. They even come with sweets, typical Japanese stuff. Ititi. There's a V3 steering wheel for racing games, looks alright. They say it's for games like Top Gear Rally and Monaco Grand Prix. I remember those, good races at the time. E.T. A plastic crossbow is featured, bit random for a games mag. They say it's not really N64 related, but it's a laugh. Sounds a bit dodgy, probably end up losing the darts down the back of the sofa. They mention the camera flash for the Game Boy camera. That was a weird thing, taking pictures and then messing about with them on the N64. They say you can dress yourself up in disco gear. Sounds daft. There's a bit about Speak to Me Pikachu Genki Dechu, that Pikachu virtual pet thing. It's supposed to understand English in the American version. Madness. And finally, there's a small piece called A Friend Indeed, pointing out someone spotted an N64 and green controller in the background of Friends on the telly. Bit sad that someone noticed that, to be honest. And a console fanzine review. Looks like it's got stuff about Zelda 64, or Ocarina of Time as we know it, which was the big game at the time. Everyone was raving about it. They mention Miyamoto's 10 Obsessions too in the fanzine. Sounds interesting enough. This page of N64 Magazine is having a bit of a laugh about the naming of Ubisoft's new F1 game, making sure everyone knows it's definitely Racing Simulation, Monaco Grand Prix, and not that other one, whatever it was. Right underneath that, there's a chance to win some Micro Machines gear, bags and t-shirts. Nothing too fancy, but always nice to get some freebies. Warrant. The main chunk of the page is Jason Moore's RETROWORLD, looking back at some old handheld games, proper retro stuff. Not like the Game Boy. He's on about Coleco, who most people probably remember for their home console. Apparently they did these mini arcade machines, playing things like Donkey Kong and Pac-Man. He reckons they were quite good for the time, especially the screens. Pac-Man. Then there's a bit about Galaxian, another Coleco one. Apparently they went to some lengths to make it feel like the actual arcade game, which is a nice touch. They seem pretty chuffed with it, giving it a 93% score. Mind you, these scores can be a bit generous sometimes. Ranger. Next up is Frogger by CGL/Konami. This one sounds like a bigger handheld, with a bigger screen, trying to capture the arcade feel. They've given this one 81%, so not bad. Ranger. Then, Alien Chase from Tommy. This sounds a bit different, a two-player game like Battleships but with aliens. Apparently it's a bit basic but could be a laugh with a mate. They gave it a 54%, bit middling that one. Finally, there's Wildman Jump from VTech. This is blatantly a Donkey Kong ripoff, no surprises there. Apparently there were loads of these little handheld clones around back then. It sounds like a cheap and cheerful distraction, nothing to write home about probably. And at the bottom, a little ad for a shop called Retro Games, saying they're open now, with an address in Hendon, and a London phone number. So if you're really feeling nostalgic, you could pop down there, I suppose. This page then, it's all about Armoridines, or Waris, as they've put it in massive letters. Seems like Probe are having another go at a shooter, and this one's looking like it's got a bit of a Starship Troopers vibe, with giant alien bugs. They're saying Turok 2 wasn't perfect, a bit jerky apparently, and that Armoridines is using the same engine but they've had 9 months to smooth it out. They reckon it's looking good, especially the bugs. One screenshot is even captioned, Starship Troopers was never as good as this. Bit cheeky that. Another one mentions, GoldenEye's Egyptian level. Maybe the levels are a bit sandy and pyramidy. There's a little box with info saying it's Probe and Acclaim, 128 megcart, for 1 to 4 players, and it's due out in winter, both here in the UK and in the States. Apparently only one weapon at this stage, but it's doing the business against the bugs, and they're even saying the bugs will fight each other, which sounds a bit advanced for the N64 at the time. Tamele. Oh, and they've got an exclusive badge slapped on it, so they must be feeling chuffed. Down the side, there's a list of what else is in the magazine this month. Let's see, Armagoins is page 16, then Command & Conquer, Harrier 2001, Lego Racers, Ogre Battle 3, Carmageddon 64, Quake 2, and Road Rash 64. Looks like a decent issue if you're into your N64. This page is about blimey, Command and Conquer for the N64, can you believe it? Real-time strategy, eh? Bit of a Doctor Who reference to start, bit cheeky. It says here it's better than the original C&C, even though it's ancient by 1999 standards, and PC Command and Conquer 2 is on the horizon. Apparently these first look screenshots are a bit Zevekui, FAAA, airly similar to the PC version, but they're saying it's actually quite different. You get to play as either the Global Defense Initiative or the, rubbishly named Brotherhood of NOD. Tiberium, that super spice, is back to power everything and give you cash to build your army. Classic stuff. They're raving about the Nintendo control system, saying it's clever and easier to use than the PC keyboard setup, and they are especially impressed with the analog control being better than the PlayStation's D-pad, which, let's be honest, was a bit pants for precise stuff. Sound compression is mentioned. Apparently they've crammed loads of speech in. Missions sound long, and the soldiers are tough. They say the release date is still anyone's guess, typical, but reckon it'll be addictive and that expansion pack maps from the PC will work. Huge things apparently. The screenshots aren't even showing the highs mode yet. Typical magazine preview shots, eh? There's a quote box saying war can be a whole bunch of fun, which is a bit rich, isn't it? And there's a picture of General Shepard and EVA, those two familiar faces. Stacks of tanks and splosions, they say, Ace. Yeah, we'll see about that, won't we? This page is all about upcoming games for the N64. Blimey. Takes you back, doesn't it? First up, it's got Harrier 2001. Looks like they're trying to make a fun playing game. After Aerofighter's assault, didn't exactly set the world on fire, crashing and burning after about 2 seconds apparently. They mention Pilot Wings as being good, and this Harrier game sounds like they're going for more action than proper flight sim stuff, which is probably sensible on the old N64. It's from Paradigm, who did Beetle Adventure Racing, so they've got form with racing games at least. JELE. Then it moves on to Lego Racers. They reckon it won't be as good as Mario Kart or DKR, but still decent, especially coming from developers who aren't exactly Iguana, who could do no wrong back then in the kart racing world. Sounds like they're trying to make it more than just about winning races, with shortcuts and smashable bits and bobs. The best bit seems to be customizing your Lego Racers, collecting bits to build your own car, bit like getting coins in Mario Kart or keys in DKR apparently. They reckon it's going to be a decent racer for the N64 if you're after something other than the top tier karting games, which is fair enough I suppose. This page is all about Ogre Battle 3, which is subtitled Person of Lordly Caliber. Bit of a mouthful, eh? Looks like Nintendo are really pushing this as their big RPG for the N64. It's in the RPG news section, so it's clearly meant to be a big deal. Warrington, they're calling it Quest's first N64 RPG. Quest being those chaps behind the original Ogre Battle games on the SNES, and that Tactics Ogre game on the PlayStation. Remember Tactics Ogre? That was quite something back in the day. Proper deep strategy, RPG, so this new one has got some big boots to fill. ICT. The article reckons this Ogre Battle 3 is going to be a proper sequel to those games, mentioning Densetsu no Ogre Battle, which I vaguely recall being a bit cryptic but decent. Apparently they'd had to hold off on the news until recently, but Nintendo are now wanting to get the word out, probably to build up some hype before release. Gameplay-wise, it sounds like it's sticking to the personality system from the older games, lawful, neutral, chaotic and all that, which affected how characters behaved. They're saying chaotic types will be a bit unpredictable, might even go mental on you. Lawful types are more reliable, which sounds about right. Apparently you can persuade characters to join your party, and they mention a few names like Magnus Galland, Leia Silvis, Diomedes Lang, and Yumil Durmail. Sounds like a right motley crew of wizards, knights, and garden landscapers. Garden landscapers? Really? Visually, there are a few screenshots showing these isometric battle scenes, you know the kind, viewed from above, bit like a fancy chessboard. They say there are 2 screens involved, a main battle screen, and a side screen for team management. Sounds like they're trying to keep things running smoothly. Release date is still up in the air for the UK, typical. US is getting it in the autumn, so they reckon we'll probably see it sometime before Christmas. Fingers crossed, eh? It also mentions it's topping the most wanted charts in Japan, so clearly the Japanese are well up for it. Let's hope it lives up to the name. This page is a look at a couple of upcoming games for the N64 back in the day, proper late 90s stuff. First up is Carmageddon 64, yeah, the one with all the running people over. Classic. Apparently this version has a whopping 30 levels, loads of vehicles, opponents, and even 5 different 2-player modes. They reckon it's still a bit rough around the edges visually, a bit scruffy they say, but quick enough. There's a funny bit about a Mr. Whippy ice cream van in the screenshots. Seems about right for Carmageddon. They mention it's meant to be out in June, in both the UK and the US, Kel. Then there's Quake 2, Activision are bringing that to the N64. They're talking about 4-player deathmatch, which was a big deal then, trying to take on Turok 2 and GoldenEye by the sounds of it. Apparently it was a bit of a task, getting it over from the PC original. They're hoping the multiplayer will be strong, as the single player might be a bit short for seasoned players. Sounds like it'll use the expansion pack for better visuals, which was always nice. They're hoping to get their hands on a playtest version for the next issue, so that's something to look forward to. All in all, 2 decent looking titles for the N64 there. This page, blimey, it's all about Road Rash 64, innit? They're calling it Bangers and Rash, which is a bit of alright that. Seems like they're going back to basics with the weapons like chains and cattle prods. Proper Larry. They're saying it's incredibly violent, which is just what you want from a bit of Road Rash, isn't it? Though they also say there's a certain lack of violence in one of the screenshots. Make your mind up. Looks like they've tarted up the graphics from the PlayStation version, and they're boasting about 10 racers on screen at once, plus the old Bill trying to nick you. They're showing some early screenshots, bits of road and bikes really, not much to write home about visually at this stage, but they reckon it's all about the carnage anyway. Multiplayer's in there too, team race, gauntlet, escape and pursuit modes apparently, sounds like your usual fare really. You geek. Then there's a bit called An Ear to the Ground. Newsy bit I suppose. Nintendo finally confirmed they're doing a Metroid game, but not Miyamoto's doing it apparently, which is a bit odd. Hybrid Heaven and Jet Force Gemini are mentioned, supposed to be using the expansion pack. Konami's jumping on that bandwagon too apparently. They're also on about Jet Force Gemini being delayed again. Typical Rare. Always late. Something about a game called ODT being in trouble. Shame about F1. And Paperboy 64 is still kicking about apparently. Not exactly earth-shattering stuff, but keeps you in the loop I suppose. This page is an advert for a multiplayer competition called The Great Multiplayer Extravaganza. They are trying to find the best multiplayer gamer in the country, fair enough. There's a picture of some blokes really going for it. On the N64 you can see the controllers and that classic grey console, and for some reason there's a cartoon Mario in a cart at the top. Bit random. It's all in association with Virgin Megastores, remember them? They were everywhere back then. Apparently they had to change the game from Turok 2. Maybe it wasn't as multiplayer as they thought. Or perhaps a bit too violent for a family-friendly shop like Virgin. Anyway, to enter you had to play through the first level of something called Port of Adia, and then get to the first save point on level 2, River of Souls. Bit of a weird way to judge multiplayer skill, but there you go. Pinte. Taray. If you were good enough, you could be one of 20 lucky N64 Magazine readers to compete for an engraved N64 trophy at the Virgin Megastore in London on June the 3rd. They're calling it the world's biggest entertainment store, which back then it probably was. They were massive. They say it was stacked wall to wall with all the latest releases. Sounds like a decent day out if you were in London, and good at whatever game they ended up picking for the final. This page in N64 Magazine is all about the challenges, proper retro stuff if you ask me. They're laying down the gauntlet for a few N64 classics. For Turok 2, it's a speed run of the first level in under half an hour, and they're even telling you to use cheats, which is a bit cheeky. The focus is just getting through it fast and ignoring everything except the portals. Then there's Mario Kart 64. Naturally Bowser's Castle is the chosen track. 2 minutes and 28 seconds is the target time. Standard tips really. Mushrooms and cornering. GoldenEye gets a look in with a Bunker 2 accuracy challenge, using the shotgun and aiming for a ridiculous 250% accuracy. And lastly, they've got F-Zero X with a Devil's Forest 2 time trial. Even giving tips for boosting and grip settings for that crazy fast game. If you think you're good enough, you had to send in photos or videos as proof. Remember doing that kind of thing? The closing date was May 24th, 1999, so bang in the middle of it all. Post your entries to Multi-Towers in Bath. Decent set of challenges, typical magazine competition to get readers involved. Bet loads of kids tried to win those Virgin Megastore trips. This page has a right laugh on it. It's all about Osumo 2, blimey, who remembers that, eh? It's talking about fat blokes in nappies, which is a bit of a crude way to put it, but I suppose that's sumo for you. They reckon this game is bringing the earth-shattering behemoths back into your living room, which is a bit much. It's hardly earth-shattering, is it? Apparently sumo is a sport enjoyed by Japanese people in Japan. Insightful stuff. And they saw it on Channel 4, which probably wouldn't have done it justice. They even mention Akebono, that massive wrestler, saying he's 6 feet 8 inches and weighs 232 kilograms. Which is about 36 stone apparently, good grief. They reckon even if you're not into sumo, you'll at least get a laugh out of this game. It mentions Chiotaikai isn't in Osumo 2, but you can make him yourself in the edit mode. which sounds alright. Customization was all the rage back then. There's also a bit about fanzine harm, where some poor woman got in trouble with Nintendo for a Pikachu fanzine that wasn't as fluffy as they'd have liked. More about Pikachu's after-dark activities apparently. Nintendo weren't happy about their Pokemon being linked to all that and shut her down for copyright, poor lass. Then there's a bit called Near Clear saying Imagineer Interactive, who did educational games, are stopping N64 games because they need a hit, or they're concentrating on educational interactive games instead. Bit of a mouthful. They lost a shed load of cash, and are going back to simple sports titles and Game Boy games, which is fair enough I suppose. Safe bet. There's a little screenshot of a game, dunno what it is, looks a bit rubbish mind. And there's a Made in Japan bit, with Max Everingham getting to grips with sumo wonderment. Seems James has left N64 Magazine, and Max has gone as well, off to America apparently. Lucky git. Prepare for something new next month, they say. Exciting times back then, weren't they? This page from the magazine is doing a special investigation into World Driver Championship for the N64. It seems like they reckon it could be the best racer on the system. They've slapped an exclusive sticker on it, bit keen aren't they? The game itself is from Boss Games, published by Midway and THE, whoever THE are, and was supposed to be out in the summer, both in the US and the UK. Looking at the screenshots, it's got Porsches, which is always a good start. One of the little blurbs says Porsche. It goes like the best kind of fast stuff. And it looks nice too. Bit of a simplistic way of putting it, but I suppose that's the point. Another comment goes on about the handling being sensitive but tasty as TGRs. TGR? Top Gear Rally I guess? They are comparing it to that. Then there's something about industrial fumes and orange skies. Sounds a bit dramatic for a racing game. There is also mention of a fab replay mode, where you can watch every minute of your race, which is probably quite impressive for the N64 days. They've also got a bit about team selection, mentioning Phantom as a team choice. Phantom? That'll do nicely, thanks very much. Yep. Again, not exactly insightful analysis is it, but it's all sounding pretty positive about the game overall. Reckon they are quite excited about it. This page has got a feature on World Driver Championship, or GT World Tour as it was previously known, for the N64. They went all the way to California to have a look at this one, which sounds a bit much, doesn't it? It's from Boss Games, who did Top Gear Rally, so you know it's going to be a racer. Pata. The article talks about the instant replay feature, nicked from Gran Turismo apparently, which is fair enough, everyone was trying to be Gran Turismo back then. It lets you watch your whole race back, which was pretty snazzy at the time, especially on a console. They reckon the expansion pack, that 4 MB wonder, will help with the visuals, which is always good. There's a bit about custom mode too, if you're not into the main championship, letting you pick your cars and tracks. Standard stuff really. They mention it's team-based racing, which sounds a bit different from the usual races, and compare it to Gran Turismo on the PlayStation, which was the big daddy at the time, wasn't it? They reckon it's gonna be ace. Bit hyped up maybe, but you know how magazines are. Still, it's another racing game for the N64 in 1999, there were loads of them around then, wasn't there? They mention V-Rally, and those Formula 1 games too, F1 WGP, that sort of thing. It was a good time for racing games on the old 64, even if they all were trying to be Gran Turismo. This page is about World Driver on the N64, looks like a preview in N64 Magazine. Right then, Viva Las Vegas, it shouts at the top. Sounds a bit excitable for a driving game, doesn't it? Apparently this first track in Vegas has got some fun bits, a 90-degree turn and handbrake action, city sections and all that. They're talking about CPU opponents getting a bit feisty, which is always good. And there are 3 routes to pick from on each track, which they compare to GT64, bit cheeky that, suggesting they're one-upping GT already. There's a bit about wide load at the side, mentioning hires mode like Top Gear Overdrive had, and how you lose the full screen to get it letterbox format they call it. Says it still looks tasty though, and if you have an expansion pack you'll get the full screen and hires. Speed and handling are mentioned, with a jab at Gran Turismo saying, never heard of it mate. Bit strong that, weren't we all playing Gran Turismo at the time? They're banging on about the visuals, calling it incredibly good and stylish handling and spanking visuals. Bit over the top isn't it? But they reckon it's up there with GT. Again, bit bold for a preview. They mention 33 fully licensed cars and 10 tracks set around the globe, with locations like Hawaii, Sydney, Kyoto, and even Lei Gay, bit dodgy that pronunciation, and something called Mysterious Black Forest. Sounds like a right mixed bag of places. They mention GT64 again, saying World Driver has more content, although in GT64, the extra routes felt like a bit of an afterthought. But in World Driver they say there's miles of extra road unfurling. Alright, we get it, it's good. There are a few screenshots dotted about, showing the in-car view, and some of the courses, Vegas and a tunnel. Looks alright, standard N64 fare for a driving game, nothing groundbreaking. Tunnel! And look at the horrific turning up ahead. Gumph. They do like their little captions, don't they? Grangay. Want to really feel the speed? Switch to first person for optimum thrills. Aye, we know the drill. Accelerate away, manage a tidy 95, and you're sorted. Right, cheers for the driving tips. Overall it's a fairly standard preview, bit hyped up as they usually are in magazines, especially back then. World Driver is looking incredibly good. We'll be the judge of that when it's out, won't we? But it sounds like it could be a decent racer for the N64, if you're after something a bit different from Mario Kart and Diddy Kong Racing. This page is about World Driver. On the N64, it's in a section called N64 Special Investigation. The article is titled Team Me Up, and it talks about the team aspect of the game. Apparently there are 33 cars, 8 racing teams, and it's supposed to be a really challenging game, which they are keen to stress. Absolutely fantastic challenge mode, they say. Gani. It mentions how you start off pretty basic and need to win races to earn cash to upgrade your vehicles, the usual kind of thing for driving games back then. You can also take on job offers, which sounds like a career mode type of feature. They say you can choose one of 2 job offers, and you work your way through 10 courses and different seasons. The more you win, the more tinkering with your team you can do, eventually leading to new and supposedly vastly superior vehicles. You start making a name for yourself and attract attention from bigger, bulkier, and more illustrious racing teams. The ultimate goal is to be the top-ranked driver in the World Driver Championship. Coolcree. There are a few screenshots showing the gameplay and menus. One shows a selection screen, where you pick your team and then a car. Another shows a race in progress. Looks quite good for the N64, got that blurry N64 look but seems alright. There's also a close-up screenshot of a car coming round a bend and entering a tunnel. They call it a spicy finish. The article also mentions one of the problems with Top Gear Rally on the N64, which is that you only raced against 3 other cars. World Driver tries to fix this by having 7 other race teams, so 8 in total, all battling it out. They say each team has individual AI, which was a big deal back then. They mention that when there are 4 or 5 cars bunched up, the game can slow down a bit, and they reckon they are working on that, so hopefully it'll be smoother in the final version. CPU opponents are going to be super aggressive too, gulp. They even added a gulp. Bit dramatic. They go on about the handling, saying it's superb, especially coming from the same people who made Top Gear Rally. They reckon to forget the sky-high leapage from Rush, and the twitchy ineptness of Cruisin', or the flawed lack of realism of Top Gear Overdrive. World Driver is supposed to have a beautiful gliding feel. Analog control takes getting used to, but it's more believable for high-speed racing. They reckon it feels like Boss, whatever that means. They also mention that the cars feel quite different, all 33 of them. Right at the end, they ask whether it'll batter Gran Turismo, which was the big driving game on the PlayStation, obviously. They admit it's difficult to say just yet, but they say World Driver is looking good visually, and the handling is stylish. They are saying that Gran Turismo on the PlayStation had more cars, but World Driver might be up there for sheer racing brilliance. Vroom. So too. Right then, moving on. This page is all about the Game Boy in it. Right at the top it's shouting about the big reviews this issue. Looks like they're covering Looney Tunes and V-Rally, both on page 43. For Looney Tunes, it asks, will Sylvester ever get his claws in that bird? Bit of a silly question, everyone knows Sylvester never gets the bird, does he? V-Rally, they reckon you'll laugh, you'll cry, you'll yawn. Sounds a bit all over the place for a racing game if you ask me. War. Then there's a big bit about Game Boy. It's all blocky letters, very 90s. They're showing off the Game Boy Color, of course, with a couple of screenshots of Tetris-style games. One looks a bit like Tetris Attack maybe. It says something about new and tips for your Game Boy Pocket camera and printer. Remember the Game Boy camera? Mad idea that was. Blurry black and white photos, hilarious. And the printer, even madder. Thermal paper and all that. Big yellow letters for link up, saying Game Boy on Game Boy action. Yeah, link cables, used to love a bit of that, battling your mates on Pokemon or Mario Kart. It says get the most out of your machine, with 4 of the best link-up games around. Wonder what they reckon are the top link-up games. Probably Pokemon, maybe Dr. Mario, Tetris, something like that. Roll. Roll. Down at the bottom it says plus, GB Final Fantasy. Classic retro RPG action from Square. Oh, Final Fantasy on the Game Boy, that would be Final Fantasy Adventure then, or maybe Mystic Quest. They're calling it retro RPG action. Feels a bit early to be calling Game Boy games retro back then, but I suppose they sort of were compared to the SNES games. We take a close look at the history of handheld Final Fantasy. Pixies ahoy! Pixies Ahoy? Bit random. And it says, issue the 3rd of May, 1999, over in the corner. So yeah, spring of 99, good times. This page is the contents page for Planet Game Boy Magazine, issue 3 from May 1999, part of N64 Magazine. Tim Weaver is the editor, and he's welcoming us to the mag and mentioning they could have made it 60 pages, but it was a bit busy, settling for 16. He mentions Martin will be doing a big review section, talking about loads of games, but only a few top-notch ones. He's also hinting at a Rare game, Conker's Pocket Tales, coming in June, though they're having trouble pinning down Rare, like with Jet Force Gemini's release. And there's a hush-hush new Metroid game in Japan too, typical Nintendo secrecy. Key. Moving on, there's a section called Game Boy for Two, about how to link up your Game Boys for multiplayer, and what games are worth playing with a mate. That's on page 38. Then there's previews starting on page 40, talking about rumbling Game Boys and this delayed Rare game, must be Conker. The reviews section, kicking off on page 43, is all about the good, the bad and the plain old ugly games, telling you to avoid the turkeys. Then they've got a Planet Retro special, on page 46, about the final Game Boy Fantasy, which is the Final Fantasy Legend game, talking about Square's handheld RPGs. Tips and Scores, on page 48, is promising to unlock Zelda secrets, and find every seashell, probably Link's Awakening again. Finally, there's a Game Boy Gallery, on page 50, with a bonkers title, Freaks, Mutants, Murderers and Cats. Sounds like a laugh. They've got the address for Planet Game Boy Magazine in Bath, if you wanted to write to them, and the team is listed as Tim Weaver editor, Will Overton art editor, Andrea Ball operations, and Martin Kitts as speedwriter. Right at the bottom it says it's page 36, so near the front then. This page is all about getting your Game Boys linked up for a bit of multiplayer action, back in the day when that was still a novelty on handhelds. They're going on about how even though the Game Boy was seen as a solo thing, connecting with mates for a game was brilliant, especially on long journeys. To get going you needed 2 Game Boys, any flavor would do, apparently, 2 copies of the game, a link cable, and obviously a mate to play with. They mentioned that the older fat Game Boys had different link sockets to the newer color, but they were still compatible. They reckon you'll probably need 2 copies of the same game, but Tetris is mentioned as a perfect example, as there were loads of copies of that about. The article does have a bit of a dig, saying some multiplayer modes were clearly rush jobs, tacked on to single-player games, just to sell more copies. But it also talks about the proper multiplayer classics available for the Game Boy, like swapping monsters and building lines, probably referring to Tetris again, or maybe Pokemon, though they don't specifically say. It all wraps up by saying you should take your link cable everywhere, because you never know when you might find someone else wanting a quick Tetris battle. Those were the days, wasn't it? Simple pleasures. This page then takes a look at getting your Game Boys linked up for a bit of multiplayer action. They're calling it Looking Forward to a Big Future, which is a bit much for Game Boy link-ups, but alright. Well, first up is Tetris, which they rightly call the granddaddy of Game Boy multiplayer. Everyone knows Tetris, proper simple and addictive. They reckon it turns into brutal head-to-head combat in multiplayer, which is fair enough, especially when you clear 4 lines and dump a load on your mate. They even mentioned the scrap between Mario and Luigi in the original where the loser gets booted off. Mad how they remember that detail. They've given Tetris a top score and called it potential to spark actual fisticuffs, which is a bit strong, but you could get heated after losing a few rounds. Next is Balloon Kid, bit of an odd one this, sort of a platformer but scrolling the wrong way. Apparently the multiplayer is a forgotten classic, which might be stretching it. I can't remember that being a massive hit. They just say considerable for the multiplayer mayhem rating, so not exactly setting the world on fire. Worry? Then there's F1 Race. They make a point that it was the first Game Boy game that let more than 2 play, which is probably true. Needed a special 4-way link-up thingy. Graphics are basic as you like, but it did the job. They say you'd end up sat facing each other, which is probably right with those link leads. They give it a decent score, but say they wouldn't fully recommend it as a solo game. Likelihood of extreme swearing for this one, and rated fair for mayhem, sounds about right if you were playing with mates and someone kept crashing into you. Lastly, Pokemon. Of course Pokemon is in here, it was huge. They say it's great single player, but the real point is battling and trading. You needed mates to get all 150 Pokemon, you know how it was, red or blue version and all that. They mention swapping a monster with a mate means you lose it forever, which is true. Bit brutal if you'd spent ages training it. They've given Pokemon top marks as well, calling it potential for tears before bedtime, which is also a bit dramatic, but you could get invested in your Pokemon team. They also mentioned Pokemon is coming in October, so this must be from a bit before the UK release then. Makes sense. This page is a preview of a couple of Game Boy Color titles, Pokemon Pinball, and Super Mario Bros. Vega. First up is Pokemon Pinball, which sounds a bit like Kirby's Pinball Land but with Pokemon creatures instead of Kirby and his helium-filled chums. Apparently it's got a rumble pack built right into the cartridge, which is a bit of a novelty for the Game Boy. They're saying it's coming out in autumn, so a bit of a wait for that one. Seems like the reviewer thinks it'll be a decent little time waster with some Pikachu action, but nothing to write home about. Preen. Then there's Super Mario Bros. For the Game Boy. Well, what can you say? It's Super Mario Bros., that classic NES game we all played to death back in '85. They're saying it's a direct conversion, but with better graphics on the Game Boy Color screen. Apparently all the warp pipes and hidden bits are still there. It's supposed to be out in the summer, and they reckon it's still a top game, even if it's not some fancy new SNES-style Mario. I suppose it'll be alright for a bit of retro gaming on the go. This page in the magazine is having a look at some of the new games coming out on the Game Boy Color. First up, it's Duke Nukem. Seems like old Duke is back, this time on the Game Boy Color. They reckon it's his first outing on the system, and he's keen to impress. It's a shoot-'em-up, they say, and looking rather tasty apparently. Spread over 16 levels, with plenty of alien pig things to blast. They're comparing it to Contra and Turrican, which is high praise indeed for a handheld. Graphically it sounds alright, nothing too shabby then. They are moaning a bit about the massive status display, but hey ho, gotta know where your ammo is, right? Out in May, so not too long to wait. Then there's 720 Degrees. Blimey, remember that one from the arcades? It was a looker back in the day. This is the Game Boy Color version. They're saying it looks pretty good for a conversion, especially on the little GB color screen. It's a skateboarding game, bit like Marble Madness, racking up points doing stunts. Originally trackball in the arcade, but D-pad on the Game Boy Color will do the job. Doesn't look quite as flash as the arcade machine, but it's okay. Needs a Game Boy Color though, no good for the old grey bricks. Due out in April, so out pretty soon. Inwa. Lastly, Clax. Another oldie from the arcades. A puzzle game from Atari back in the 80s. This one's also for the Game Boy Color only, so you can't play it on your old Game Boy or Pocket. You'll need to upgrade, they're saying. Cheeky! It's a color block game, making lines of colors and all that. Should be in the shops this month, so keep an eye out for it. This page has got a preview of some upcoming Game Boy games. First up, it's Conker's Pocket Tales, which they're saying is a smaller version of the Conker game for the N64 but on the Game Boy. Remember Conker from Diddy Kong Racing? Yep, that squirrel. Apparently this one is a bit like Zelda, an action RPG, with different areas like pyramids and Wild West towns. Sounds alright, they reckon it's gonna be good, and the screenshots do look quite colourful for a Game Boy game even if it is a bit dinky looking compared to the N64. Then there's Logical. Now this one takes me back. It's basically Downfall, that old marble game on the Game Boy. Remember that thing? Loads of blue plastic and you had to get the marbles to the bottom. This is the electronic version from Sunsoft, and they say it's out now. It was always a decent brain teaser back in the day, good for a bit of peace and quiet if you could get away from the telly. Lastly, it's Spy vs Spy on the Game Boy Color. Spy vs Spy, that's a blast from the past. Proper old school from back in the 80s. Black and white spies, setting traps for each other. This is a color version for the Game Boy Color, and it's got 32 levels. They reckon it looks a bit like penguins, those spies. Still, Spy vs Spy, you could have some laughs with that if you had a mate with a Game Boy Link cable. Looks like April is going to be a good month for the old brick if you were still lugging one around at that point. This page from Planet Game Boy and N64 Magazine, we've got a couple of reviews here. First up is Looney Tunes for the Game Boy, and blimey, they're saying Infogrames are really milking that Warner Bros. License. Apparently this Looney Tunes game is a blatant rip-off of Mario, right down to the blockbusting and the slightly odd way characters move, but they reckon it's still quite good. Better than other Warner Bros. Stuff anyway. They mention loads of characters like Taz, Daffy, Bugs, and Tweety, and you can even launch Tweetier enemies apparently, which sounds a bit bonkers. They've given it a 4-star rating, saying it's well worth a look and an excellent title, so not bad then. Then Mindle. Then we have V-Rally, also from Infogrames. This one's got a 2-star rating. Ouch. They reckon it's a bit of a letdown compared to the N64 version, which was probably a given, wasn't it, on the old Game Boy. They're saying it's just too easy, and the cars are like they're on rails, not really sliding about corners like you'd expect in a rally game. They even point out how remarkably straight the roads are, which is a bit of a dig. Easy left, easy right, easy game. Not really worth the money they've put, so yeah, doesn't sound like a winner. Shame really. V-Rally on the N64 was alright, but this Game Boy version sounds like they really cut corners. Ah well, you can't win them all, can you? This page is a review section from a magazine. Looks like a Game Boy special going by the games on show. First up, Shanghai Pocket. Blimey, Shanghai on the Game Boy, who'd have thought? The reviewer reckons Bruce Lee might have played it to chill out, which is a bit daft. It's a mahjong game for crying out loud, good for the train apparently. They say it's therapeutic, matching tiles and all that. There are a few different game modes, like a time attack and versus modes. Sounds alright if you're into that kind of thing. They gave it 4 out of 5 stars, so not bad for a handheld puzzler. 2Ds. Then there's A Bug's Life, the Disney film tie-in. They reckon it looks like Oddworld, but coloured in, which isn't exactly a compliment. Gameplay sounds awful. Frustrating, trial and error stuff, with pointless animations clogging up the cartridge space. Apparently, the main character, Flick, stops dead all the time, and dies from falling in a puddle. Sounds like a right laugh, not. The reviewer says if you get it as a present from your nan, punch them. Blimey, harsh. They gave it a 1 out of 5, and say it's a crap old platform game, and wonder if Disney and the game company are trying to get rich quick by combining the film and game. Bit cynical. They reckon you should demand your receipt back if you get it. Ouch. This page takes us back to 1999 with a look at NBA Jam on the Game Boy Color and Bugs and Lola. Operation Carrots. First up is NBA Jam, and yeah, it was on everything back then, wasn't it? This version is from Acclaim, costs 25 quid, password link up, no color, yes out and now apparently. They say it's instantly recognizable as NBA Jam, all the usual arcade options and real teams. The screenshots show the familiar court and player lineup screens. Apparently you can't spot Kobe Bryant in there, and neither can they. Bit cheeky that. The review mentions the start button for Turbo, a bit awkward if you had big hands it sounds like. They reckon it's mindless fun, especially if you crank up the speed in juice mode, and they give it a 3-star rating, saying there aren't many better basketball games on the Game Boy, which is probably fair enough. Then there's Bugs and Lola, Operation Carrots from Infogrames, 20 quid, password link up again, no color, yes out and now. This one is a cartoon platformer, and it's about Lola Bunny. Apparently she's Bugs Bunny's main squeeze. Who knew back then? They joke about whether their relationship is platonic or not. Very serious stuff for a cartoon bunny game. You can switch between Bugs and Lola. Bugs is stronger and digs holes. Lola jumps higher and has an umbrella. Very useful for a rabbit. They've got screenshots showing Bugs pushing a chest and Lola with her umbrella. Yosemite Sam's making an appearance, eyeing up some rabbit steak, and Tweety pops up too. They tried to get Lola to roll a pin on Tweety, but no luck. Probably a good thing. They say it's good clean fun but not that varied, and give it 3 stars too. Reckons bunny fans will enjoy it. Seems like a decent enough distraction if you were into that sort of thing. This page is having a right old chuckle about the Final Fantasy Legend games on the Game Boy. They're saying, remember when Square, those Japanese RPG wizards, decided to ditch Nintendo for the PlayStation? Apparently, it was all about needing loads of space for those fancy pre-rendered cutscenes, which the N64 just couldn't handle. Rubbish of course, as we all knew the SNES could do amazing things. Anyway, they're looking back at the Game Boy Final Fantasy Legend games, saying they were a bit of a surprise after all the amazing SNES RPGs. Apparently when you start Final Fantasy Legend you get to name your own little party of adventurers, choosing from humans, mutants, clippers, Red Bulls, were-rats and zombies. Quite the motley crew, eh? They reckon the graphics are primitive, and the music is just bleeps and bloops, but there's a decent story buried in there, and you're climbing a tower with different worlds on each level. The reviewer mentions it's got a fantastic amount of variety and imagination, even if it is a bit basic compared to what we were used to. They've even given it a star rating, 3 stars in fact. Warrington, there's a screenshot of a battle with a zombie, looks pretty simple, and another one showing a tiger-type enemy, properly retro. They also mention this slightly disturbing thing in Final Fantasy Legend where you can eat the monsters you defeat, and sometimes your characters evolve into something else proper weird. Flintstones drumsticks indeed. They've got a little picture of an imp changing into a baby worm after chowing down on some spider's meat. Madness. So yeah, bit of nostalgia for the old Game Boy Final Fantasy Legend games. Not quite Final Fantasy as we knew it, but still a decent little adventure back in the day. This page is all about fondly remembering the best Game Boy games ever, specifically focusing on the price of these legends back in the day. Apparently all the Square RPGs on the Game Boy were released in the UK, which was quite incredible if you think about it, but finding the original carts could be tricky even then. The article mentions Sunsoft, who seemingly picked up the rights to re-release them. It talks about a quick phone call to Sunsoft's UK offices, which revealed they didn't plan to officially release the games here, but UK shops were importing them anyway, specifically mentioning Electronics Boutique, where these RPG classics were cropping up. Then it moves on to eBoy Games Ever, and kicks off with Final Fantasy Legend 2, claiming it's the crowning glory of Game Boy role-playing games. They say it starts with your typical young hero on a quest story, structurally similar to the first game. Apparently the main storyline is quite broken up into sub-stories, and you're searching for your missing father and solving the riddle of the Magi Stones. Graphics are sharper, and combat is refined, which is a plus. They give it a 5-star rating and highlight that even on the big Final Fantasy games, you could end up with robots, monsters and mutants in your team, which was a bit bonkers. The screenshot shows a battle with a goblin and a skeleton with text, "Key, I'll heal you." They reckon if Square are smart, they'll release color versions, probably wishful thinking even back then. Next up is Final Fantasy Legend 2i, which they reckon is more like a proper Final Fantasy, with a less all-over-the-place storyline and a proper combat screen where everyone faces the enemy. It's got a time travel story, but apparently it's not quite as imaginative as Legend 2, but still a fantastic purchase. They give it 4 stars, comparing it to Star Wars, Return of the Jedi, saying it's got more glitz and glamour but isn't as satisfying in game terms. The screenshot shows a village scene with the text, "Elder, wait, and Elder Myron Sharon A. Karen," and the article comments that Legend 2i definitely goes for a more cosmic storyline. Lastly, they talk about Final Fantasy Adventure, or Mystic Quest as it was also known. They say this is where things get a bit confusing because while the Legend games were proper role-players with stats and menus, this one is more of an action RPG, similar to Link's Awakening in style, overhead view, no menus, and lots of puzzles. They mention if the setting and roaming monsters look familiar, it's because you've probably played Secret of Mana on the SNES. Apparently it was originally going to be called Mystic Quest, but got tied into the Final Fantasy Game Boy series. They reckon, Zelda aside, this is the best action RPG you could get on the GB, long and involving and easy to control. Another 4-star rating here. The screenshot shows a character in a house with dialogue. "Do you know a girl with the secret of the Tree of Mana?" There's also a little box saying, "The blobby looking things are rabbites. Cute and cuddly but prone to smacking you around the chops," which is a bit of a silly description. This page is all about tips and tricks for Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, on the Game Boy. Ah, the Game Boy. Simpler times, eh? It's called a guide, and reckons it's giving us tips, scores, guides and the Game Boy. Catchy title for a page then. Right, so it's diving straight into secret seashell locations. Back then, hunting for these shells was a proper mission, wasn't it? Apparently, if you're utterly flummoxed finding these things, this guide's got your back with some brief directions. They're not wrong, some of them were a bit obscure to find without a nudge. It runs through a load of locations like Maid Village, Martha's Bay, Mysterious Forest and loads more, telling you to dig here, cut bushes there, that sort of thing. It's got little screenshots of the game showing roughly where to look, classic stuff. Then there's a bit about stealing from the shop, remember that? A cheeky way to get stuff, but you'd pay for it later when the shopkeeper zapped you. They even credit Richard Horsfield of Wokingham for that tip, bless him. Must have been chuffed to see his name in print. Lastly, it's on about learning the secret of getting into the Color Dungeon. This is for the Color version of Zelda, so maybe the Game Boy Color had just come out, or was still fairly new then, can't quite remember exactly. It says it's tricky to find, and you need the Pegasus boots and to go to the library in Maid Village. Dash into the bookshelves, of course. Standard Zelda logic. So yeah, classic stuff for getting you through Link's Awakening back in the day. Pretty helpful page if you were stuck, or just wanted to grab all those secret seashells. The next page in this mag is all about Game Boy. Classic stuff really. It kicks off with some tips for the Game Boy camera. Remember that weird little thing? Apparently you could speed up Mario dancing on the title screen by fiddling with the D-pad, and flip stamps when you were being artistic. They mention run, 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 and wild frames bits and bobs for customizing your dodgy black and white photos. Then there's a call out for high scores, bless them. They wanted to know how you were doing on your favorite Game Boy games. Even those mini-games on the camera. They've got a whole list of top scores for things like Tetris DX, Ultra, and Marathon modes. Simon Parsons seems to be doing alright on Tetris, and Ollie Mins is racking up the points on Marathon. There's even a Pokemon import section, showing how many monsters people have collected. John Davies is leading there with 144. Game & Watch Gallery gets a shout out too, with Donkey Kong and Parachute scores listed. Barney Dean seems to be a whiz at those. Slap bang in the middle of the page is Wario Land 2. Screenshot of Wario looking a bit lost, saying something about a spooky level to get back to the castle. They've got a tip for a Flagman DD minigame if you get 100% completion, and another one saying lazy sods can unlock extra levels just by leaving Wario alone at the start. Always loved Wario Land games, proper platforming. Down the bottom there's a Bubble Bobble Part 2 level select code, good times, and a cheat for a Sheepy Shop minigame in Donkey Kong Land 3. Finally, they're asking for more high scores to be sent in by post or email, looking for the next generation of top gamers. It's all very retro now, isn't it? This page is from the magazine's Game Boy Gallery section, and it's all about readers sending in their artistic efforts made using the Game Boy camera. It's quite amusing actually, looking back. They had loads of submissions, apparently overwhelmed by them from the sounds of it. They've picked a selection of what they reckon are the best, or at least most interesting, and stuck them on the page. There's a winner, some bloke called Ryan Medlock, who's done a picture of a Lakitu, that spiky cloud geyser from the Mario games, and they reckon it's restrained, which suggests the others are a bit wild. Then there are loads of little Game Boy camera snaps with captions. Someone called David Teixeira from New Zealand sent in 3, and they've picked one that looks like some kind of, well, it's a bit disturbing to be honest. Something about the results of Prozac on the troubled psyche. Cheerful stuff. There's another one where the sender is apparently detained at Her Majesty's pleasure, which sounds a bit ominous, probably just some daft student being cheeky. Another one is supposedly a self-portrait by a James McLaughlin, and the reviewer is taking the mickey out of his ears. There's a really sunburned looking fella, described as the unfortunate results of failing to wear sufficient sunblock. Oh dear. Then there's Tommy O'Reilly from Finland who's making V signs, whatever that's all about. A Kevin Sini picture is apparently not entirely pleasant, which is putting it mildly looking at it. Someone called Lee Fletcher of Halifax has sent in what they call a prime piece of family abuse. Again, not entirely sure what to make of that one. There's a picture of a gorilla, and they're wondering what body part was used to make it, which is a bit gross to think about. And finally there's one by Mark Kent, something about mutilation tip homies and dope mutant bro, which sounds like the kind of edgy stuff teenagers were into back then. Overall, it's a right mixed bag of weird and wonderful Game Boy camera creations. It's funny to see what people were doing with the thing back then, before everyone had a camera on their phone. They are giving away a shiny new Game Boy Color, and a brand new GB game for the most imaginative one next month, so they are clearly trying to keep the submissions coming. They want your freaks apparently. Charming. You had to send them to an address in Bath if you were feeling brave enough to share your Game Boy art. Madness really. This page from N64 Arena magazine, reviewed and completed, very important stuff back then. It's all about Duke Nukem 0 Hour, remember that? Duke's back, apparently with loads of guns and wisecracks. They're even asking if it's better than GoldenEye, which was a bold claim at the time. Telwyn, they've got their guide to scoring here, because N64 games were pricey, weren't they? So they had to be sure you were getting your money's worth. Star Game Badge for 85% and above, that's top tier. Blue Ball for 84 to 70%, still good, worth having in your collection apparently. Green for 69 to 50, just okay, playable but nothing special. Orange for 49 to 20, lazily made, or just a rubbish idea to start with. And Green for 19 to 0, the disaster zone, avoid at all costs. They're not shy in telling you if something's rubbish. Then they break down what the scores mean. Visuals, sounds, mastery, lifespan, and verdict. Visuals is about the graphics, naturally. Are they GOBS, macking for the N64? Sounds, are the tunes any good, or should they be turned off? Mastery is how well the game uses the N64 hardware, and lifespan is about how long you'll play it before getting bored. Verdict is the overall fun factor, and how they reach the final score using all these things. Good old N64 Arena trying to guide us through the expensive world of N64 carts. This page in the mag is looking at a few games coming out. Up top there's something called All-Star Baseball, which, well, it's baseball in it. Then Vigilante 8, that's the car combat game, drive and shoot sort of thing. They've got an import arena section too, showing games that are big in the States and Japan. Snowboard Kids 2 is mentioned. Those annoying kids are back on the slopes apparently. Hascha. Over on the right side, they're previewing California Speed, and blimey, they reckon it's one of the worst driving games ever. Ouch. Lode Runner 3D is in there, the old puzzle game getting a 3D makeover. Smash Bros is featured as well, the US version of Nintendo's Brawler, and Harvest Moon 2 for anyone wanting a bit of farming RPG action. The middle section is all about Team 64. Looks like a staff bit. They're all wearing sunglasses, proper naff Duke Nukem shades. And they're taking the mickey out of themselves really. They're saying good old Duke Nukem is making Andrea go weak at the knees, and that Tim Weaver thinks he's moved up in the world by wearing slippers in the office. Each person in the photos has a little box with a funny comment and their game of the month. Martin Kitts picked Harvest Moon, Andrea Ball chose Snowboard Kids 2, Will Overton also went for Harvest Moon, Jess Bickham's game is Vigilante 8, Justin Webb went for Baseball, Pete Travers chose Lode Runner 3D, Tim Weaver picked Duke Nukem, and Paul Edwards, poor sod, got California Speed as his game of the month. They're all saying they had to shoot each other for various reasons in these boxes. All a bit of a laugh really. This page in N64 Arena Magazine, issue 28, takes a look at Duke Nukem 0 Hour for the N64. Seems like they're ditching the first-person view that Duke is known for, and going third-person, a bit like that Duke Nukem Time to Kill game on the PlayStation. They reckon it's because Eurocom, the developers, have decided that's the way to go, moving away from what made the original Duke games on PC so popular. The reviewer seems a bit wary, saying it might be a bit of a letdown because of this change. They mention the rulebook of shoot-'em-ups has been studied though, so perhaps it will still be alright. There are a few screenshots, one showing a spinning contraption before you go to the Wild West level, another of some zombies which are apparently not historically accurate for Victorian times according to the caption, and another where the caption says only a fool stands with their back to Duke. There's another one that says, "Welcome to the school of hard knocks, punches and gunshots." Looks like classic Duke humor is still there, even if the view is different. The specs for the game are listed as GT 128 meg, playable with 1 to 4 players, needs a controller pack with 13 pages of memory, and rumble pack. It's expected in May and costing £40. Seems about the going rate for a new N64 game back then. This page screams late 90s N64, doesn't it? We've got old Duke Nukem front and center, looking as roided up as ever, seems like he's got a shotgun pointed right at ya, and is saying his catchphrase, "All hail to the king, baby." It's for Duke Nukem 0 Hour on the N64, proclaiming to be a star game, according to the N64 Magazine at least. They're calling it Chem Hour in big yellow letters, bit of a weird title if you ask me. There's a couple of small screenshots down at the bottom showing some gameplay, looks pretty standard Duke fare from what I can see. Shooting mutants in some kind of sewer level, and apparently you might be surprised by a skeleton's entrance. Sounds charming. It's all very Duke Nukem, not sure it's going to be a massive departure from what we've seen before, but I suppose if you liked Duke on the PC, getting it on the N64 would have been something back then. It's dated May 1999, so right in the thick of the N64's life, still plenty of games coming out then. This page from N64 Arena Magazine looks at a couple of games. The first bit, Say Goodnight to the Bad Guy, seems to be about a game called 0 Hour. They're going on about how it's a bit like Duke Nukem, in that you can see through security cameras, but reckon it's not quite as well done as they'd hoped. Apparently, moving the cameras is a bit of a pain, and you can't always tell what you're looking at. Still, they think it's a neat idea. The reviewer reckons the game has a decent selection of bad guys, and that the first chunk of the game is mainly about Porky Pig type enemies, with some green aliens later on. They mention the levels are a bit claustrophobic, especially a Titanic level, and there's trails of blood and bodies lying around. Sounds a bit grim, doesn't it? They talk about insectoid enemies, and creepy crawlies too, making it sound like a proper monster fest. There's a quote in there, something about romantic nights in probably a bit of cheeky humor from the reviewer. Then there's a section called Time to Kill, laid out in numbered points. Looks like tips or level walkthrough stuff maybe. Point 1 talks about gun emplacements and using grenades on them. Point 2 mentions heading down into tunnels with spooky noises. And point 3 is about blood, a switch, and avoiding electric sparks. Sounds like your typical run and gun action from back then, good for a blast after school, wasn't it? This page in the magazine is having a look at Duke Nukem 0 Hour on the N64. Right then, seems like after that Turok game came along and had all those weapons, Duke thought he needed to up his arsenal. They're saying there's a good selection of new guns, and some of the old favourites are back, like those trip bombs with the red laser, and what they're calling spanking new stuff. Apparently, you won't be going home without something called the big nuclear gun thing. Sounds about right for Duke. They've got a little box out with some classic Dukeisms, bits of dialogue he might spout like, "Wah, mama," and gonna rip 'em a new one. Classic Duke, bit cheesy even back then, in it, choir. Level 2 is the focus here, set in these underground tunnels, which they reckon are a bit claustrophobic. They're talking about some new bad guys, including pant-sweating facehuggers charming. They mention a big blue alien weapon thing, which sounds powerful, and some kind of fan you need to blow up with a grenade. Later on, there are ceiling-mounted guns, and these spidery aliens that sound nasty. And of course, hovering droids to finish things off near the end. They point out a switch that opens a door to a water-filled room. Swim for your life, they say. And after going through a door, there's ammo and a babe all ready for rescuing. Bit predictable, that Duke, isn't he? GoldenEye gets a mention too for popularizing the sniper rifle, but they reckon 0 Hour puts it to even better use. "There goes his head," they exclaim. Yep, sounds like Duke alright. Probably good for a bit of mindless blasting. This page in N64 Magazine is all about Duke Nukem 0 Hour. It's got a bit at the top talking about how Duke needs power-ups even though he'd never admit it, you know the sort of thing. Health packs, vitamin X for speed boosts, and night vision goggles, which they joke about being for UV at night. Then it goes through some highlights of the game in numbered sections with screenshots. First up, it mentions a car park level that gets blown to bits, proper explosive stuff. Next, they point out the mutant enemies you'll be facing and tell you to fill them full of lead. Charming. Then there's a bit about dropping down a lift shaft and finding yourself in the streets. Classic level design. After that, it mentions gas grenade wielding aliens and using your big bang stick. Bit childish, but hey, it's Duke Nukem. Finally, they say you can shoot fire hydrants for health, which is a neat little touch. Below that, there's a section called Come Get Some, about a training area. Apparently, it's got target practice, grenade practice, and a Turok-style assault course to sharpen your skills. They reckon you can nick all the training gear like gas masks, night vision goggles, grenade launchers, and sniper rifles to use in the proper levels. Bit cheeky that. The bottom section, It's Clobberin' Time, seems to be about the mission structure. They say it's good because it tells you your main objective and mini-objectives on screen, unlike GoldenEye, apparently. They reckon each objective pops up after you finish the last one, keeping you on your toes. They mention cutscenes and how the levels are packed with atmosphere, comparing it to Turok 2 for exploding scenery, all very dramatic. And they finish off by saying Duke's just doing what he loves, saving babes using big guns, and spilling loads of alien blood as you do. There are also little tips dotted around, like ricocheting grenades off walls, something about a red comms room, and shooting metal gratings to find secret areas, standard fare for these sorts of games back then. This page is all about Duke Nukem, 0 Hour, on the N64. Right then, let's have a look. Dorrington Norcus. It seems they're giving a bit of a walkthrough, pointing out a few things as you go. Starting with number 6, it mentions finding a bloke who'll give you a keycard, typical Duke stuff. Then, at number 7, they're showing off a sniper rifle, always good for picking off those alien swine from a distance. Number 8 points out a time machine, which they've cheekily labelled as Gary Spice. I see what they did there. Number 9 mentions a switch in a building that opens the subway, and number 10 warns about a tank that might accidentally run you over. Bit of a laugh there. Below that, there's a bit about an enemy on his knees, maybe dead, maybe begging for mercy. They're comparing the rocks to Lilac Wars. Bit of a random comparison. Then there's Duke on a ledge, making a quip about hovering miles above the earth, classic Duke bravado. They talk about nasty computers that regenerate bad guys, so you gotta take them out. Makes sense. And then there's a big old alien mothership hovering over New York City, alternative present they're calling it, and they're joking it's as bad as getting a tie for a present when you wanted a bike. Haha, typical game reviewer humor. In the main text, they're going on about how Duke's catchphrases are still funny, like piece of cake and wah mama, and saying they don't get old because they're not overused, which is fair enough. They reckon the sampled speech is crystal clear. Must be showing off the N64's sound capabilities, I suppose. And visually, they're praising the graphics, saying it's got suitably graphic detail and is atmospheric, comparing it to GoldenEye in that respect, which was high praise back then. They mention the draw distance is good, and the environments are varied, from downtown streets to snowy areas, and even post-nuclear bits and bobs. Sounds like they're quite impressed with how it looks, given it's the N64. This page in N64 Magazine is having a look at Duke Nukem, 0 Hour's multiplayer, and they've called the piece, Stick It. They start off by saying that nothing has really beaten GoldenEye for deathmatch on the N64, which is fair enough. GoldenEye was amazing at the time, but they reckon Duke Nukem's multiplayer is actually rather good, especially considering it's more like old-school Doom than trying to be a realistic shooter like 007. They mention the arenas are well designed, particularly a level called Cool as Ice, which sounds a bit bonkers, and that the big weapons are great fun. Apparently it offers some of the most frantic battles since Snowboard Kids, which is a bit of an odd comparison, but maybe they mean it's just chaotic fun. They do point out that in 4-player mode it can get a bit jerky, but nowhere near as bad as the mess that South Park was. Elsewhere on the page they're talking about the single-player game, saying you get scored at the end of each level based on time, how many enemies you've killed, and babes you've rescued. They mention secret areas with radios playing tunes, and that it's a bit violent, saying you can't blow up the Statue of Liberty, unfortunately. There's also a joke about the Spice Girls, saying it's definitely not them in the game, which is a bit random but typical magazine humor from back then. They seem to think the game's got a good mix of ideas and that Duke doesn't disappoint, talking about blood and gore, aliens in tubes, and a Wild West level. Sounds like your typical Duke Nukem fun and silliness, really. This page in N64 Magazine writes, having a look at Duke Nukem, 0 Hour. Blimey, 90%, that's a cracking score back then, wasn't it? They're calling it a brilliantly executed blasting trip, which is a bit much, but I suppose for the N64 it was pretty decent. They reckon it's not quite varied enough, but still a good laugh. The review is titled, "Up Your Ass, Cheeky Buggers." They're talking about how Eurocom spent time putting amusing posters in the game, things like Golden Guy and Bullock Alien Hunter, ripping off movie titles, you know the sort of thing. Apparently, some of the posters are a bit too rude to even mention. Typical Duke. And there's a bit about Nintendo banning booze in the game. Because of Ted Ninto, the sheriff in the Wild West level, haha. There are screenshots dotted around the page. One's from the Cool as Ice multiplayer level, they say it's good for a laugh when you accidentally fall off. Another is Castlevania, looking all misty. Apparently it's lovely. Then there's one with Duke talking to himself, present Duke chatting to future Duke in the present. Oh mama. Sounds a bit daft, doesn't it? And another one about parking your car in a dodgy area. Blimey. They give it 9 out of 10 for visuals, saying it's fogless and detailed, and 9 again for sounds, saying the speech is brilliant, and the music is eerie and atmospheric. Mastery and Lifespan get 8 out of 10 each. Mastery is apparently far better than PlayStation's Time to Kill, bit of a dig there. Lifespan, they reckon it's hard and multiplayer keeps you going. Yeah, not a bad game if you like Duke. Bit of mindless fun, wasn't it? Good score from N64 Mag anyway. This page is having a look at All-Star Baseball 2000. Seems Acclaimer back for another go at the plate, as they say in baseball. Right at the top there's a bit of a cheeky intro, saying previously in N64 but then admitting they never actually reviewed the previous one. Bit of a laugh I suppose. Warrington Knee. They've got a few screenshots dotted around, showing off the game. One of them is a player sliding into second base, and they're joking it looks like he's cramped up, but he's dubbed second base successfully. Another one shows a batter, Mr. Colon apparently, and they're having a laugh, comparing him to Superman. Then there's another picture with a player running to base, and a caption that's a bit sarcastic about stopping running. Oh never mind. Classic. And another one, they're banging on about the graphics, saying they're so good real baseball pales in comparison. Maybe. Always with the slight dig, these magazines. Down below they've got a box with the game details. All-Star Baseball 2000. Acclaim, it's 96 meg, needs a controller pack rumble pack, and it's £40. Out now apparently. The main text is going on about how they were expecting futuristic baseball, with robots and jetpacks and all that, back in the old millennium, but this is more traditional. They reckon it's a good thing, a welcome return to a more normal version of baseball. They mention the graphics are good, and the player animations are spot on. Apparently the developers, Iguana, know what they're doing. They say the players move realistically, strutting up to the pitch, sliding into bases, even trotting like an imbecile after a home run. Faces are mapped well onto the polygon heads, and the shadows and backgrounds are decent too. Even the cityscapes in the distance don't distract you too much. Seems like a decent baseball game for the N64 then if you're into that sort of thing. Not exactly GoldenEye is it, but each to their own. This page features a review of All-Star Baseball 2000 for the N64, which, as I recall, was hitting shelves around May of '99. They're calling the instant replay mode flawed but gorgeous, which sounds about right for N64 replays back then, a bit clunky but looked alright for the time. They're also banging on about the creator player mode, hilariously calling it Frankenstein's monster, mentioning you could even give your player sunglasses, which was probably a big deal at the time for customization. It mentions it's not quite as in-depth as WWF Warzone's creator player, which yeah, Warzone was pretty extensive for its day. There's a bit about taking control, saying even a beginner can pick it up, and that there's a cooperative mode if you fancy teaming up with a mate against the computer. Classic N64 multiplayer stuff. Down at the bottom they've got these little boxes giving scores. 9 for visuals, 5 for sounds. Ouch. Sound of a can full of gravel being shaken vigorously is a bit harsh but funny. 8 for mastery, 8 for lifespan. Overall verdict is 80%, saying it's a spot-on interpretation of baseball, but less impressive than it used to be. Which is a bit lukewarm, isn't it? Sounds like they liked it, but maybe weren't blown away. Mark Green wrote the review, can't say I remember him particularly. This page is about Vigilante 8, yeah, I remember that one. It's got that bloke on the left in the red jumpsuit, posing with a massive rifle, looking a bit like he stepped out of a dodgy 70s film. The title, Vigilante, is plastered in big orange letters across the page, can't miss that. There are a few little screenshots dotted about showing some car combat action, bits of desert and explosions, typical stuff for this kind of game back then. One caption mentions planes being hazards, Another that 4 players is a bit of a slowdown but still fun. They're saying it might be a PlayStation game originally, but it's a decent enough conversion to the N64. They even mention the Hoover Dam level, reckons it's one of the best. Seems like they think it's alright, if not exactly groundbreaking. Tour. Down at the bottom there's a box with the game info. Out now, it says. Published by Activision and Luxoflux. Says 1 to 4 players, needs a controller pack, and it's 40 quid. 40 quid. Blimey, games were pricey back then, weren't they? This page from N64 Magazine in '99 is all about Vigilante 8, yeah, I remember that one. It was a bit of alright car combat game, wasn't it? They're calling it Driving Miss Crazy here, and reckon it's a PlayStation game that's been given the N64 treatment. Apparently Luxoflux, the developers, have done a decent job of the conversion, unlike some shockers we'd seen before like Nightmare Creatures, which they slam as a poor photocopy. Ouch, Morinyi version. The article talks about how it's all about souped UP cars with weapons, proper Mad Max vibes they say, which is always good fun. They highlight some of the special weapons you can get, like the 70 van UFO invasion, which launches mini UFOs with tacky laser noises. Sounds right up my street, that does. Then there's the 70 Stag pickup bee attack, swarms of car battering bees. Brilliant. And the 69 Jefferson Quake speakers causing earthquakes, and 76 Leprechaun glitter ball, glitter that chassis knackingly effective apparently. Bit silly, but in a good way, you know? Hi-yi-yi. Hi-yi. They mention the levels too, like Nugget City and Hoover Dam, and say each level has an objective, like protect or destroy something. And they mention a blimp in the Vegas arena you can drive the car onto, and cable cars in the ski resort level. Sounds like a laugh. Right at the top corner there's a little bit about unlocking an alien character, hidden on the last level. Apparently if you finish the game you can play as it, or just bung in gimme_DA_alien as a passcode. Sneaky. Overall, they seem to think Vigilante 8 is a decent conversion, proper sprawling levels and all that. Not too shabby for a bit of N64 carnage, I suppose. This page from N64 Magazine, right? It's having a look at Vigilante 8. Remember that one? Proper car combat game, that was. Super Dreamland 64. They've called this review, which sounds a bit much, but it's talking about a new level in the game that's all bright and colourful, a bit different from the usual rusty scrap-heap settings. First up, sight for sore eyes graphics then. They reckon if you had the expansion pack you could play it in higher, cleaner and crisper, but still not quite as good looking as Turok 2 or Rogue Squadron. You could put in a cheat code for ultra high resolution apparently, but it made it a bit jerky. Visuals get an 8 out of 10 in the box, saying it's detailed, especially with the expansion pack. Sounds is next, with a 6 out of 10. They say the sound effects are alright, but the music is a bit irritating. Mastery gets a 7. They're saying it's a bit like a PlayStation game but shinier, with a 4-player mode and an extra level chucked in. Lifespan gets a 6. They reckon you'll blast through the single-player mode quickly, but the multiplayer is decent enough. Tanya. Reading the main text, it goes into more detail about the levels being these big arenas, and you can smash up loads of stuff, trees, buildings, even planes. There's a team game mode, which is always welcome, but they do mention when things get busy, it can slow down a fair bit. There's a 2-player co-op mode in the main game too, which is good for a laugh with a mate. They reckon the game is never going to beat Mario Kart or anything for long-term play, but the variety of vehicles keeps it interesting for a bit. They talk about different vehicle characteristics, but then say they're all a bit similar really. The single player can get a bit repetitive, but the multiplayer can be proper daft fun. Rint? The verdict box gives it 74%. Says it's an entertaining distraction, but it's not got loads of lasting appeal. But they do admit cars and guns, it's always a laugh, isn't it? Pinge. The screenshots show a few bits of gameplay. One's captioned, burning through a barn in Hicksville, USA, and another shows a ski resort level which they say is very slippery and slidey indeed. So yeah, Vigilante 8 then. Good for a bit of mindless fun at the time, if you didn't have anything better to play. This page in N64 Magazine's Import Arena is having a look at Snowboard Kids 2. Seems they gave the original a quick look in issue 25, and reviewed the proper version way back in issue 12, so they're clearly fans. It's an import game, as usual for this section because these games are only out in Japan and America at the moment. They're saying they get to review them early because N64 is region free, which was a big deal back then if you remember, although they do promise a proper UK review when it finally gets here. Jilcore. There are a bunch of screenshots showing off the game, looks pretty colourful, bit like the first one really. One shot shows a penguin character going through some speed-up fans. They're saying they make you go faster. No, honestly. Sarcastic lot. Another one has bombs, because of course it does. And another shows some kind of rope bridge, and they're surprised someone got to first place. Miracle indeed. There's a massive dinosaur in one picture. Seems a bit of a hassle to avoid, And then another one is set on some space course with striped zippers. Apparently they give you even more speed. Finally, there's a shot of a rocket being attached to the snowboard. Expect plenty of air, they reckon. There's a little info box saying it's from Atlas, needs 64 megs of memory, and it's for 1 to 4 players. You'll need a controller pack and cartridge backup, naturally. It's about $55, which they reckon is about 35 quid. You could get it from CA Games if you were desperate to play it early. This page from N64 Magazine, back in '99, is all about Snowboard Kids 2. Seems they're pretty chuffed with it, reckon it's got some new tricks up its sleeve, which is always good. They're highlighting some gameplay bits, calling them evasive action and backfire, which were in the first game apparently but are better now. Evasive action is about dodging power-ups, and backfire is about using power-ups to slap opponents when you're in front, Mario Kart style they say. There's also boss races in the story mode, against a giant snowman and a mechadamian. Sounds a bit bonkers, doesn't it? There's a bit about the characters too, under New Kids on the Block. Apparently the original 4 kids are back, but Jam's had a bit of a, shall we say, change in appearance. They've added Wendy, who runs the internet cafe, and she's got these massive glasses, bless her. And if you beat the story mode, you unlock this dark kid Damien, who's gone purple. Plus, if you really put the hours in, you can unlock Mr. Penguin and even Mr. Dog, the shop owner, for some reason. Packy. Then at the bottom, in the thank you and good night bit, they're reminiscing about the first Snowboard Kids, saying it was a quirky little racer that came out when there wasn't much else around, before F-Zero and F1 World Grand Prix and all that. They were expecting good things from the sequel, and seem quite pleased, even if it's not blown them away. They say it's got plenty of extra options, so it sounds like they reckon it's a decent follow-up, even if it's not a massive leap forward from the original. This page is all about Snowboard Kids 2, for the N64. Right then, so it's taking a look at the story mode of this snowboarding game, saying you play through 9 tracks and boss races and all that to unlock courses. They've got little boxes showing off some of the levels. Sunny Mountain sounds pretty standard. Fairly trad mountain course with shortcuts and apparently a giant fish, alright then. Then there's Wendy's house, subtitle, oh my gosh we're tiny, which looks like you're racing around a bedroom, bits of toys and stuff, sounds a bit bonkers. Turtle Island, subtitle Picnic on Turtle Island, says the snow's gone and you're racing underwater halfway through. That's a bit different innit? Linda's Castle is up next, Happy Birthday, set in a large castle with jumps and shortcuts. Jingletown, Mission Snowman, is back to snow, but less polish and snowy cottages. Remember DKR? Donkey Kong Racing? Maybe they mean that. Finally, Crazy Jungle, find the legendary butterfly, which has got a waterfall jump and a shortcut over deep gullies. Sounds a bit more adventurous, that one. The review bit underneath is saying it's not got extra bits for experts, and it's pretty similar to the first game. They reckon Snowboard Kids 2 is criminally slow, saying your speed depends on the hill's steepness, and even falling on a flat bit is slow. Bit harsh maybe, but they do say it's arse-bendingly slow and makes you want to scream. They compare it to Mario Kart's balance and Turok 2's graphics, saying it's not as good, but then they also say someone called Martin loves it if you like quirky, cute, Japanese-style games. Apparently it's got 12 new tracks and stunt courses and shoot game variations. They say the multiplayer is still good fun, even if it's technically a bit basic. So, a bit of a mixed bag then. Sounds like they think it's alright, but maybe a bit slow compared to other races back then. This page in the magazine right then is having a look at Snowboard Kids 2 in the import arena section. Seems like we were getting games from Japan still at this point. Wasn't everything PL region by then? Anyway, Snowboard Kids 2. I remember the first one, it was alright, a bit kiddie looking, but fun for a laugh, moolah. This article breaks down different bits of the game. For the courses, there's Starlight Highway, which they say uses Diddy Kong racing zippers to get some air, and Haunted House, which sounds like your typical spooky level avoiding ghosts and pits, and then Iceland, which is about avoiding missiles and using coins for power-ups. Sounds like the usual sort of level themes you'd get back then. Warrington. Then they go into the game modes. Trick game is all about stunts and getting points. Shot game is a weird one, where you deliver newspapers to houses while on your board, bonkers really. Speed game is just a race against the clock, and battle mode is your standard multiplayer scrap on any of the tracks. So a decent amount of variety then. They mention some new power-ups, bombs, ghosts and all sorts, plus new ones like whirlwinds and multiple ghosts. Sounds a bit chaotic, but that was half the fun in these sorts of games, wasn't it? They also go on about how getting hit by a power-up makes you drop coins in your own power-up, which is a bit harsh, innit? Pitbeki. The review then scores it on the usual bits. Visuals are functional 3D, nothing amazing. Sounds a cheesy synth-pop, well, that's a given for a game like this. Mastery is apparently decent game design, with speed being the main thing. Lifespan is supposed to be long because it's quite hard, and good for multiplayer apparently. Finally, the verdict. They're a bit on the fence, aren't they? Saying you want to like it but it's just too slow. Gives it 80% in the end. So not a classic then, but probably a decent enough rental for a weekend if you were bored in '99. Probably better off sticking with 1080 degrees. Snowboarding if you wanted a proper snowboarding game on the N64. Still, Snowboard Kids brings back some memories, doesn't it? This page then, it's a look at California Speed on the N64, from issue 28 of N64 Magazine. Right then, California Speed, does this exist? Is the question being asked here, and well, after reading this review you kind of wish it didn't, mate. Tim Weaver, the reviewer, he's not holding back, is he? 36% is the final score. Ouch. He says it tries to be fun, but is instantly forgettable. He's laying it on thick, calling it driving horse manure. He says it's like a boring arcade game idea sketched on a napkin at McDonald's by untalented programmers. Bit harsh, Tim. Apparently there are 14 courses across California, Sunshine State and all that. He mentions you drive through a volcano, an alien ship, and even the Golden Gate Bridge, which apparently has holes in it. Visually, it gets a 4 out of 10. Passable, he says. Fuzzy, misty, but at least there's imaginative scenery. Sounds get a 1 out of 10, described as dreadful music, and apparently written and produced by Lucifer himself. Mastery is a 2, cretinous AI, and no car physics, and lifespan is a 4. Everyone travels at the same speed, making it impossible to finish first. He compares it to Cruisin' USA and Rush, but not in a good way. Says the handling is like controlling a golf cart. Basically it sounds like a bit of a stinker. He mentions some good things to look at like tidal waves, but overall he's not impressed, calling it a boring N64 game derived from a boring arcade game. So yeah, California Speed may be one to avoid then, according to N64 Magazine anyway. Looks like it was about $50, roughly 35 quid back then. Out now in the US, summer release for us, in the UK. Right, moving on then. This page is an import review from N64 Magazine, and it's all about Loadrunner 3D. Remember Loadrunner? Blimey, that was ancient. Back in the days of the Commodore 64 and ZX Spectrum. Proper retro that. Jeshad. Anyway, they've dragged it kicking and screaming into 3D for the N64, and the reviewer seems a bit on the fence. They call it a golden oldie that's lost a little of its sheen, which sounds about right. It's got these fuzzy graphics apparently, making your eyes water, not in a good way I reckon, and the tunes are above average but go on a bit. Mastery is a 4 out of 10, because it's just 3D Loadrunner, not exactly pushing the boat out, is it? Lifespan gets a 7, because it's challenging and sporadically engrossing, but also tedious, which is a bit of a mixed bag, isn't it? There are a couple of screenshots showing the 3D gameplay. Looks a bit basic to be honest, blocks and ladders and that. Apparently you're collecting gold coins and using a laser to blast blocks, classic Loadrunner stuff but in 3 dimensions. They're moaning about the level selection screens, saying they are a bit of a faff with ridiculous loading screens at every turn. Oh yeah, loading screens, we remember those fondly, don't we? Hawaii ki, Jubowi. Verdict at the bottom is carefully thought out and surprisingly enjoyable retro update, but then it says the old school gameplay looks positively embarrassed next to other N64 games at the time. Ouch. Overall score is 70%, so not bad, not amazing, just alright then. Sounds like a bit of nostalgic fun but probably not going to set the world alight. May 1999, so yeah, about right for that era. This page in N64 Magazine, right, it's all about Smash Bros, or Smash Brothers as it's called over in Japan. They gave the Japanese version a blinding 90% in the last issue apparently, which is pretty good going. This time it's the US version they're on about, and it's got a big Star Game logo slapped on it, so they must think it's a bit special. Looking at the screenshots, it's a right old Nintendo mashup, isn't it? You've got your Mario types, your Donkey Kong, Pikachu getting involved, even Fox McCloud from Star Fox is having a rumble. Seems like they're all battering each other about in these stages, and instead of health bars it's all about percentages. The higher the number, the more likely you are to get launched off the screen. A bit different to your Street Fighter 2 if you ask me. Root. The review bit goes on about how it's a beat-em-up unlike any other, which sounds a bit strong, but they seem properly impressed. Saying it's innovative and fast and all that. They reckon it's throwing the rulebook out the window, which is probably magazine talk for it's a bit different. Apparently it's great for 4 players, sounds like a right laugh with a few mates around. They're even saying hurrah for Smash Bros at the end, so they're definitely sold on it. Seems like it could be a decent bit of fun when it finally hits the shops over here. This page in N64 Magazine back in '99 was all about Super Smash Bros, that import brawler everyone was raving about from Japan. It's a bit bonkers really, seeing Nintendo characters like Link, Yoshi and Pikachu all scrapping with each other. They've got screenshots showing the chaotic 4-player mode, looks like absolute carnage. Deech. The reviewer reckons it's got Mario Kart-style power-ups, with bits and bobs appearing to spice things up, like shells and bombs. Apparently the stages are quite something, mentioning Planet Zebes with lava and Hyrule Castle with whirlwinds. Sounds a bit more interesting than your average fighting game stage, to be fair. They're on about Link being able to use his boomerang and bombs, Donkey Kong being strong, and Yoshi, well, Yoshi's always been a bit weird, hasn't he? They say he can lick up enemies and spit them out. Charming. There's a bit about a secret stage too, classic Mushroom Kingdom, which you unlock by completing the one-player game with all the original 8 characters. Sounds like a bit of a grind to unlock that. And right at the bottom there's this "We Must Smash" campaign. Seems like they were getting loads of letters asking for the game to be released here in the UK, as it was only available as an import at that point. Bless them, trying to get Nintendo to listen. They've given it a 90% overall, praising the visuals, sounds, mastery and lifespan. Verdict is, Nintendo triumph again, calling it a must-have. Bit strong words, but then again everyone was going mad for this game at the time, weren't they? This page is having a look at Harvest Moon 64. Seems like they already gave it a review in the last issue, back in N64 Magazine 27. It's got some little tips for players, like remembering to use the calendar in your shack to keep track of stuff on the farm, you know, vital things like when Bessie the cow is having her calf. Apparently, the cake shop is where all the cake fiends go. Bit much, isn't it? Down at the ranch, you'll meet your horse, Whiskers. Sounds a bit like a cat name for a horse. Then there's Old Beardyman, selling seeds, and he's a bit pricey with his potato seeds, telling you to take a hike if you don't like it. Cheeky sod. He does give some sage advice though, telling you to fertilize often, which is always helpful. The mayor is introducing you to the seed shop girls, bet that's a highlight for some. Keep your hound away from the waterhole, good tip, don't want muddy water. There's even a trendy farming dojo apparently, as far as they can tell anyway. Sounds a bit out there for a farming game. On the telly, all you get is the weather report, just like real life in the countryside. Harvesting spuds without a horse is a slow job, not surprising. There's also a flower shop, where you can get your seeds, and then there's Craftsman Saibara, who makes things obviously. Oh, and the weather tomorrow is sunny, according to the game's tele-forecast. So Harvest Moon 64, a bit different for the N64, farming instead of the usual blasting things. Might be alright if you're into that sort of thing, a bit of a slow burner maybe. This page is all about Harvest Moon 2, for the N64, looks like a bit of a preview in N64 Magazine back in '99. Right at the top it's got Down on the Farm, which is a little diary section. Seems like they were messing about in the game, getting Jethro-san, the character, to sleep in and miss work, which didn't go down well with the grocer. Surprise, surprise. Then they're chuffed about selling their spuds, Maris Pipers no less, made a killing apparently, and had a whole day off. Taking photos is mentioned, though seems a bit basic. Only one snap to begin with in the album. Then there's bits about sniffing catnip with kittens, classic gaming journalism, and downing beers or something that looks like beer anyway at the pub. They even touched on chatting up the ladies. Jethro's got his eye on a blonde but can't get his words out, relatable stuff. And another section called Get Lucky, where he seems to have attracted the attention of a woman, though it ends with a domestic incident and advantage Jethro. Sounds a bit dodgy if you ask me. Probably harmless for the time though. Below that it goes into Moon 2, in big letters, which is obviously Harvest Moon 2. They reckon it's a shine on you crazy farming RPG. Talks about the farm sounds, cows mooing, kittens, the check from the abattoir, all that pastoral charm. Mentions getting married is the ultimate aim. They describe it as a penniless farmer, living in a shack, and having to raise stock. Seems like a slow burner type of game, not exactly GoldenEye levels of excitement, but maybe something a bit different if you were after a change of pace from all the usual platformers and shooters. They even mention finding beaches, ranches, huts filled with men and pixies, and even dog pee in your shack, lovely. And apparently, old animals never die in Harvest Moon, they just get sold to the shop. Cheerful stuff. Sounds like a quirky little game, probably a bit too niche for my tastes back then, but someone must have been into it. This page delves into the world of farming, well, video game farming that is, with a guide to the animals in Harvest Moon 2. It runs through the usual suspects you'd expect on a farm, like chickens, sheep, cows, horses, and even a hound. Apparently chickens are basic and cheap, sheep are brilliant, but nobody in the village cares about sheep's milk. Cows are the Rolls-Royce of farm animals needing constant attention, and horses are like Zelda. You get them young and have to wait for them to grow up. The hound, on the other hand, sounds like an absolute menace, ready to pee all over your crops the moment you turn your back. They're really selling it, aren't they? The page also gives little ratings for the game in categories like accessibility, which is low because it's all in Japanese. Visuals and sounds, both marked a decent 7. Mastery, also a 7, and Lifespan getting an 8, suggesting it'll keep you busy for a while. The verdict section at the bottom gives it a solid 82%, saying it's a quality bit of software even if it is in Japanese, but they reckon you'll get more out of it when the English version finally shows up. They seem quite smitten with it, saying it's pleasingly different, and you might even develop a serious crush on it. Bit strong, isn't it? Still, farming game on the N64, who'd have thought it? Looks alright in the screenshots, very SNES-like in a way, colourful and chunky. They mention finding special items like fishing rods and cheese machines, so there's more to it than just mucking out stables then. This page from Club 64 Magazine, blimey, takes me back. Right then, front and centre is Wipeout 64, splashed all over the shop as the top guide for the month. They're really pushing the lean, mean fighting machine angle, making it sound like some kind of hardcore experience. Chuckle. Below that there's a bit about South Park getting a grade A multiplayer guide. Must have been all about causing chaos with your mates back then. And then FIFA 99, wondering how good you really are, typical footy challenge. Flicking over to the contents on the right, Club 64 mailbox, someone's going on about Ganondorf being large, whatever that means. How to covers Wipeout, South Park and FIFA 99, obviously tying in with the main features. Help wanted section is about GoldenEye scenarios, and more Zelda secrets. They always had Zelda secrets, didn't they? Tips extra is just general tips for new games, nothing too exciting there. Dr. Kit's Game Clinic. Some bloke answering gaming problems. Bet that was insightful. Nintendo Hotline chipping in with Zelda queries. Must have been a popular game then. Results is about mutant games. Sounds a bit dodgy. I'm the best, come and see if you've made the grade. Probably some reader competition thing. Skill Club 64 leagues with gold, silver and bronze leagues. A veritable games playing Olympics, they say. Bit dramatic. Contact for pen pals and fanzines. Remember those? Directory every N64 game reviewed and rated. Probably worth a look. And finally, back issues and subscriptions, and some 1999 reader awards. All the usual magazine stuff really. And there's the page number, 81, right at the bottom. Yep, classic magazine page, that is. This page from Club 64, it's the mailbox section in it. Blimey, reading through this takes you right back. Right then, the star letters from some bloke in Ipswich, banging on about Perfect Dark and reckons you should be able to use the Game Boy camera to put your face in the game. Bit of a laugh, mind you. Imagine seeing your mate's mug plastered all over a bad guy in Perfect Dark. Then there's a correction corner bit. Some smart Alec called Jay from Manchester is setting the record straight about the first console with an analog stick. Apparently it was the Vectrex back in '82. Who knew? And they're having a giggle about Xena, warrior princess, being from Leicestershire, when everyone knows she's not. Well, she's fictional anyway. Onto something section, someone spotted that little kid in the telead who's obsessed with video games. They're saying it's a bit much, 10 hours a day, you know, typical Daily Mail fodder probably. Anywhere's piece is about Zelda, Ocarina of Time I reckon, and how non-linear it is. Bit of a chin scratcher that one. Reckon they're just saying you can wander about Hyrule as you please. And lastly, 4 wheels, someone's lost all their wheels in F1 World Grand Prix. Classic, we've all been there, trying to take Eau Rouge flat out and ending up in the barrier. They're asking for folks to send in their crash videos, proper old school. They're even looking for the most dangerous F-Zero X track ever made. Mental. This page of Club 64 in N64 Magazine has got a few reader letters in the mailbox section. First up there's a chap called Joe Maxey asking about using Din's Fire before getting the magic sword in Zelda, Ocarina of Time, which is a fair question, but Ed, the editor, rightly points out that Zelda's a bit more story-driven than Mario, so you can't just go completely off-piste. Then there's a bit about a hook or secret area in Zelda in Kakariko Village, behind the windmill. Someone thinks they've found something but can't get to it because of a fence. It's the kind of thing we were all doing back then, wasn't it? Scouring every inch of Hyrule for secrets. Next, there's a funny one about Ganondorf larging it in a nightclub in King's Lynn. Apparently, a reader saw a flyer and joked about the King of Evil turning up on a Saturday. Ed plays along nicely, listing a load of DJ names he might be hanging out with, very droll. Or, someone called S. McKee is a bit disappointed with Turok 2, Seeds of Evil. They reckon it looks great and the weapons are cool, but the levels are a bit linear and basic, and it slows down. They thought the original Turok levels were better. Ed just says, yeah, it wasn't perfect, but neither was GoldenEye. Which is a fair point, I suppose, sets the bar pretty high, does GoldenEye. There's a very quick mention of someone figuring out how to get their own color on the joypad, following on from a previous letter, must have been a hot topic at the time, customizing your controller color. Then we get into the Dream On section with game ideas. Andrew Harriet has come up with Police Force 2000, where you're running a police force in a small town, catching criminals, building stuff, even deciding if executions are public or private. Ed reckons it sounds a bit like a really violent PC game, which is probably right. Way more. Finally, Batzer Woodward's got an idea for a new Zelda game called Ganondorf's Revenge. It's all about Ganondorf escaping and trying to off Zelda's parents. It sounds like a bit of a Back to the Future ripoff, but Ed says it's a decent story idea, but needs some development time. Probably a polite way of saying, back to the drawing board, mate. So yeah, typical reader letters page, bit of Zelda chat, some game ideas, and general musings on what was hot at the time. Good stuff. This page in N64 Magazine, it's the mailbox section bonus letters up top. Always a bit of a laugh to see what random stuff people were writing in about. Someone called Joe from Twickenham wants to stick toffee wrappers to his specs. Classic. Andrew Pearl is impatient for Perfect Dark. We all were, mate. Then there's some funny replies from Ed, whoever he is. There's a question about coffee and tea, and then a bizarre one about Bath being full of morons, oh dear. Someone's got buck bumbleritis. Sounds painful. And a Timber the Tiger fan club. Who knew that was a thing? Yesy. Then there's a bit about painting your N64 controller. Someone called Oliver Cat has made a luminous green joypad. Honestly, green? Each to their own, I suppose. He's giving instructions on how to take it apart, which is a bit brave. You could easily wreck it. Over on the right there's a letter about tennis in Zelda, which is a bit of a weird take on the Ganondorf fight, but alright. Then there's a cute photo of some kids dressed up as Link, proper homemade costumes. They're after an ocarina, bless them. Top Link costumes, says the mag. We want more of these. Gay. Down at the bottom, so tell me this, the usual questions about upcoming games. Someone's asking when we'll get a light gun game for the N64. They mention Knife Edge, which I vaguely remember, and wonder about Nintendo doing something like a light gun peripheral. They're asking about Super Mario 64 2, and Perfect Dark Coupe, always hopeful, weren't we? Then Half-Life 64, which was a rumor mill for ages. Gadju. Then a question about Grand Theft Auto 64, and Carmageddon 64. GTA 64 they say isn't likely. DMA designer having trouble with the conversion, which doesn't sound promising. Carmageddon 64 they reckon it's unlikely but fun though, wouldn't it? Someone's asking about Exhumed 64 as well, apparently still in the ultra release list. Then there's a question about Harrier 2001 or Flights of the UN, and Need for Speed 64 being a conversion from the PC. They reckon Harrier 2001 and Flights of the UN are actually the same game somehow. And Need for Speed 64, yeah, it'll be a standalone game but using the same engine as the PC version, so okay-ish PC version they reckon. Finally, someone's asking about boxing games on the N64, and the answer is basically, don't hold your breath. PlayStation is where it's at for boxing games they say, and even then, not much happening. This page from the N64 magazine has got a quiz on the left, probably to win some cash, 50 quid it says. Looks like typical gaming magazine fodder, with questions about games like Gran Turismo, Duke Nukem your ass your face, that classic Duke catchphrase. There are questions about California Speed, South Park Wonder Witch Kenny, Kyle, Cartman Powell they're on about, Iguana Games, Snowboard Kids, Harvest Moon games that were knocking about at the time. And something about Planet Game Boy must be talking about the Game Boy Color then. Over on the right it's the N64 board, the reader's art section. There's some wrestler art for WCW/NO Revenge, yeah that was a big deal back then. Snowboard Kids artwork, cute enough. Zelda 64 art, naturally everyone was drawing Zelda back then weren't they? Smash Bros is in there too, and another Zelda picture. Someone's done a drawing of Kazooie as a girl. Bit odd, but each to their own. Looks like some effort went into these, fair play to the kids. This page from N64 magazine, it's the Right You Are section, where readers get to have their say. It seems to be all about reviewing games, and they've gone with a theme of, hardest game in the world that is. Well sort of, which is a bit cheeky. First up is Mission Impossible on the N64, getting a whopping 88%. Dale from Nottingham seems pretty chuffed with it, saying it's got its problems but it's still a right laugh. He mentions sneaking around, spray painting cameras, and reckons it's a close second to GoldenEye, which is high praise indeed back then. There's a little picture showing some bloke in a suit doing his secret agent thing. Wahaler. Then there's Rogue Squadron, which has been slapped with a miserable 47%. Andrew from Wirral wasn't having any of it, calling it dull and repetitive. He moans about flying the same missions over and over, and dreadful fogging, which probably means you couldn't see much, a common complaint back then. The picture is some spaceship flying over a desert planet. Typical Star Wars stuff. Main core. Next up, it's Top Gear Overdrive, which has scored a massive 91%. Billy from Manchester is raving about it, saying it looks stunning and the soundtrack is ace. He's also on about secret cars and courses, which were always a big draw. The screenshot shows a gold car racing along, looking quite speedy. Finally, and not in a good way, it's Castlevania, with a truly dreadful 34%. David from Dorchester is absolutely laying into it after waiting years for it, calling it rubbish and saying the camera is awful, the levels are just straight lines and the maze section is possibly the worst bit in any game ever. Blimey, he couldn't even finish it apparently. The picture is a chap with a whip looking a bit lost in a spooky castle. Right at the bottom it says to send your reviews to Right You Are at the N64 Magazine address in Bath if you want to get your opinion printed. They want about 100 words of controversy or agreement, so nothing's changed there then. This page then, yeah, it's a feature on Wipeout 64, back on the N64. It's a how-to guide for the game, promising to help you take gold every time. Blimey, ambitious. It says it's toe-curlingly hard but rewarding, and to read on. There's a bit in a box called What We Said, which is from their review in issue 23, gave it 88%. They called it another racing triumph and rattling good fun, so they were clearly quite chuffed with it. It does mention the game is really difficult though, teeth-grinding ly difficult apparently, and makes a point about saving your progress regularly, especially if you're going to play something like Mario Kart afterwards. Apparently it crashed on them a few times, which wasn't exactly unheard of back then with the N64. Good advice to save regularly, mind, especially on a game that tough. There are some screenshots too, looks like your typical futuristic racing, very Wipeouty, and a screen showing the save options. So yeah, all about getting good at Wipeout 64, and not losing your progress. Sensible stuff. This page is all about getting your skills up to scratch on Wipeout 64, you know, the proper fast futuristic racer on the N64. They're running through some general tips to help you out. First off, turbo start apparently. You need to keep an eye on the thrust gauge and tap A when it's about 3/4 full. Who knew, eh? Then it's zip it, about grabbing those blue triangle symbols dotted around the tracks for a speed boost. They reckon if you grab a few in a row, you'll really notice the difference. Next, cornering, where they suggest getting to the outside of the track, then swinging in, making sure you get nice and close to the edge, a cat's whisker away as they put it. And lastly, air brakes. They say these are a right pain to master, especially on Macau 2, and not really worth it for cornering anyway. They've even stuck in a few screenshots to show you what they're on about. Pretty standard stuff to be honest, but back in the day you'd lap up any advice you could get for Wipeout. This page on weapons in Wipeout 64, yeah, that was a bit of alright futuristic racing on the N64 back in the day. Right then, weapons they're banging on about here are the usual suspects. Missiles, they reckon they're like green shells from Mario Kart, a bit of a tap to slow down the opponent, not massively damaging. Rockets are decent enough, spread shot for corners or close range, nothing groundbreaking. Then there's the electro bolt. Sounds impressive, but they're not too keen, say it's weak and only good for annoying people in multiplayer really. Drains shields a bit, maybe lets you overtake, but not that practical they reckon. Quake disruptor, now that's more like it, a proper track ripper. Sends a wave out, messes everyone up, drains energy. They say don't use it too close, let 'em get some distance. Sensible advice that. Thunderbomb, yeah, that's a team favorite apparently. Clears out anyone nearby, good for multiple kills, proper chaos. Brock, super weapons. Getting serious now. AG system shield raider. Bit brutal this. Drains all shields in one go, crash and burn, close range jobby again. Oricom energy sphere. Sounds poncy, precise aiming, need a straight bit, charge it up, fire it. Bit slow though, might miss. Kyrex power snare, they reckon it's the worst. Just slows people down so you can overtake, depends where you are on the track when you use it. Bit situational. Piranha 2 stealth, now this sounds cheeky. Ghost mode from Mario Kart with invincibility, good idea, doesn't last long though, make it count. Physar minigun, looks pants but apparently packs a punch. Melts crafts but useless on slopes. Goes straight into the floor, typical. Kia. Secret section, everyone loves a secret. Bonus track Velocitar, gotta get bronze on all race challenges. Speed freaks only, fair enough. Extra vehicle, Piranha 2 craft. Bronze on all time trials, sounds decent. Outclasses others apparently. Super weapons, Cyclone tech, bronze or better on weapon challenges. Boost your weapons big time, but can't use it in challenge mode. Bit of a swizz. New category, super combo, complete all others. Bronze medals all round, something else unlocks, no idea what. More challenges, gold challenge, 6 golds in any category, then you get a 7th gold challenge, 4 in total. Sounds like a proper completionist's nightmare, but back then we were well up for that sort of thing. This page from Club 64, How to Take Gold Every Time in Wipeout 64, it's all about getting good at Wipeout 64 on the N64. Remember Wipeout 64? Zooming around like a futuristic hovercraft nutter. It talks about weapons and power-ups, the usual stuff. Mines to drop behind people, shield to stop you getting blown up, turbo boost for a bit of extra speed, E-packs to recharge your shield if you take a pounding, and autopilot to sort of guide you around if you're rubbish. It does say autopilot's handy if you're near the front, but knowing autopilot in games like this, it's probably more likely to steer you straight into a wall. Then it gets into the challenges, which are basically races or time trials grouped as race mode. They've split it into 3 races or time trials. Race 1, time trial 6, it says even with the slowest craft you can win if you hit all the speed zippers, those boost pads, yeah? And apparently, the minigun is your best mate here for blasting rivals, especially near the finish. The tunnel section is a tricky S-shape, so left then right after the checkpoint, and don't scrape the sides, or you'll be starting again. Race 2, Time Trial 1, mentions catching zippers at the end of the first tunnel, and after the first checkpoint, hug the right wall, hit the zippers on the left when the track straightens out. For the S-bends, go wide and turn early to grab the speed boosts. Sounds like they are really sweating the small stuff here to shave off seconds. Race 3, Time Trial 5, reckons the CPU opponents are pretty good, so hitting every zipper is vital. In the tunnel, hold the craft steady and stick to the track. Save the autopilot power-up for the bend after the first checkpoint, activate it on the straight, and disengage after those first 2 zippers, then move outside for the next set of zippers. Blimey, sounds complicated just to win a race? Warrington Boar. It's all about mastering those tracks and zippers to get gold. Back then, we really were obsessed with every little trick, weren't we? Good times, mind. This page is all about getting through some of the trickier bits in what looks like a futuristic racing game, probably something like Wipeout or F-Zero. Can't quite tell from the screenshots, but they all look a bit samey in this style anyway, all those polygons, eh? They're calling it The Challenges Continued, so must be part of a longer guide. They're giving tips for Race 4/Time Trial 2, Race 5/Time Trial 3, and Race 6/Time Trial 4. Seems like they reckon Pfizer is the craft to use for the first time trial, reckon it handles well. For Race 5/Time Trial 3, the advice is to save your autopilot for the corners, which sounds about right if it's a fast game. Race 6/Time Trial 4 feet is all about air brakes and hitting the accelerator at the right moment. Pretty standard racing stuff really. Then there's a section on weapons, labeled Weapon 1 foot to Weapon 6. Weapon 1 foot talks about rockets and miniguns, good for corners and straights obviously. Weapon 2 feet is about stopping near weapon points, and then using a weapon to destroy anyone who overtakes. Bit sneaky that. Weapon 3 feet says the super weapon is important for a gold award and to watch your shields, makes sense in this kind of game, where everyone is trying to blow each other up. Weapon 4 feet is about the energy sphere, and using it to take out CPU crafts. Sounds powerful. Weapon 5 feet mentions air brakes again, and grabbing a power-up near the finish line. And lastly, Weapon 6 feet is about picking up an extra weapon in the first tunnel, and using the end of the track for easy kills. It's all fairly standard stuff for these futuristic races, air brakes, weapons, speed boosts, hitting the right lines. Probably useful if you're stuck on these specific challenges, I suppose. They're trying to be helpful anyway. This page from Club 64 is all about getting good at Wipeout 64. Proper classic that was, wasn't it? They've got a section called Super Combo that's basically tips for the combat side of things in the game. Combo 1 is telling you not to waste your super weapon on corners. Sensible advice really, wait till you're on a straight bit to line up a shot. Combo 2 is about the energy sphere, saying hold fire until you are close to someone, makes sense, get the most bang for your buck. Combo 3 is about the Shield Raider, using it to soften up opponents before hitting them again. Combo 4 is just telling you to ditch the rubbish weapons like mines and electro bolts to make room for the good stuff. Combo 5, they reckon the power snare challenge is a bit of luck to get gold at, and they've got a sneaky tip about racing fast and parking yourself on a weapon grid to get gold, sounds a bit cheeky. And Combo 6 is all about the Thunder Bomb, saying it's the best weapon to slow down the leaders or take out a group. Then there's a gold challenge section, split into race, weapon and time trial. For the race challenge, it's all about knowing the track, hitting the zippers, those speed boost pads, and not crashing into the sides. They even mention a shortcut after the tunnel, using the analog stick to fly over the side rail. Bit risky that, but could be worth it if you're feeling brave. For the weapon challenge, they say you've got 6 opponents to destroy, and it's not too hard with the super weapon, just stick to someone until they're gone, making sure you hit the checkpoints of course. And finally, for the time trial, they say the Piranha 2 craft is good for it, as it's nippy, Stay close to the side rails and keep your lap times down. They warn about the long bend at the end of the lap, saying just a gentle nudge on the stick or you'll end up in the wall. Classic Wipeout then. Yeah, good old Wipeout 64, proper adrenaline rush that game was. This page is a decent guide to getting through those challenges. Might have been helpful back in '99 when we were all trying to beat our mates. This page from N64 Magazine, issue 28, looks like a guide on how to get better at the South Park game on the N64, bless 'em. It's a how-to guide, trying to help you gain authority in South Park, which is a bit of a laugh, isn't it? The tagline is, tired of being a 90-pound weakling? Read our guide and say it with us. Beefcake! Bit much, really. The review in What We Said box mentions they reviewed South Park in issue 25, and were quite impressed, saying, the greatness of South Park has rubbed off on it well. Seems like they were fans, giving it a 73% score. Not bad, not amazing, pretty standard for the time. The main article by Daniel Glenfield talks about the game being popular with its wacky, foul-mouthed cartoon kids. He's giving tips for multiplayer, calling it definitive guide on how best to kick South Park butt. Tactics-wise, they mention double teaming for when you've got more than 2 players, and sniper tactics from high spots using the sniper chicken and cow launcher, typical South Park madness. Then there's cover, using boxes and crates in the warehouse level to hide and ambush people. There are screenshots from the game showing the in-game view, looking a bit blocky as you'd expect from the N64, but you can see the characters running around in 3D versions of South Park locations. Kenny's there in the middle of the page looking like he's about to say something muffled. Overall, it's a bit of light-hearted advice for folks wanting to get better at blasting each other with fart jokes in South Park. Good bit of fun for a laugh with your mates after school. This page in Club 64 of the magazine is all about the multiplayer levels in South Park on the N64. Right at the top, they've split the levels into short matches and long matches, which is fair enough I suppose, keeps things organized. For short matches you've got your Dugout, Badlands, Badlands 2, Warehouse, Gym Class, the Plant Factory and Neighbors. Then the long matches are Crater Fort, Splash Tower, Cabin Fever, Ware War, Crater Fort again for some reason, The Hill, The Dam, The Ravine, and UFO Core. Quite a selection really when you think about it. They go into a bit of detail about a few of the levels, like Dugout, saying to stay on the top level to grab the power-ups and avoid the lower levels makes sense, high ground and all that. Badlands is for sniping apparently, keeping your distance and picking people off. Warehouse is described as small, suggesting it's going to be a right old free-for-all, advising you to get up high on the ladders. Then there's Gym Class, mentioning hiding behind the stand for weapons. The plant and factory levels are also mentioned with tips about using boxes and crates as cover. There's a section on pincher tactics for team play, and power up, advice about grabbing the best weapons and waiting. Standard stuff really for multiplayer games. Oh, and they have character codes for unlocking secret characters. CHEATINGISBAD for Mr. Mackey, ELVISLIVES for Bar Brady, Outrage for Big Gay Al, and loads more like Love Machine for Chef, and FISHNCHIPS for Pip. Bit of fun for trying out different characters, I guess. And lastly, a code for Skinny Mode, VEGGIEHEAVEN, whatever that's all about. Yeah, not a bad little guide to the levels, and a few cheeky cheats thrown in for South Park multiplayer on the N64, back when split screen with your mates was the only way to play really. This page from N64 Magazine, yeah, this is taking me back. It's a how-to club section, looks like for South Park. Right then, it starts with level guides. Crater Fort is described as having a small room, and you can use a Terrence doll to trap people, or just blast away with rapid-fire weapons. Splash Tower sounds a bit more open, with water pools and sniper points, and you've got to watch out for getting egged, which I guess is getting hit with something. Ware War is warehouse-based, unsurprisingly, with armor to find, and ladders and dead ends. Sounds like a bit of a maze. Cabin Fever is about hiding in a log cabin, and using dodge balls, powered-up ones at that, to bounce off the walls. The Hill is about keeping to the top and picking off people coming up, and the Dam, well, it's got small towers and water pools, bit like Splash Tower then. Then it moves on to I Fart on Your Grave. Charming title, isn't it? Basically some tips for multiplayer. Strafing is essential, obviously. Dodging left and right makes you harder to hit. Tooled Up says grab the best weapons quickly and go hunting, and that weapons regenerate fast so you can camp out until you're fully loaded. Underwater areas have power-ups, Cheesy Poofs being the main one apparently, and you can even use weapons underwater, which is good to know, even snowballs. Hideouts are just using objects as cover, boxes and that. Know your way is obvious, learn the levels. Invincibility is a starter boost, use it to grab weapons. Crosshairs, well, turn them on, makes aiming easier, who knew? Warps are hidden teleporters to weapon stashes. Look out for ladders and chimneys to get to them. Finally, weapons. Snowball is rubbish apparently, only use it as a last resort. Dodgeball is better in open areas, faster than the lightning version, and in enclosed spaces the normal one is better too because it bounces off walls. Lastly, the toilet plunger gun. Single shot is slow and weak, so use the triple shot instead, and apparently you'll come across them often enough. So yeah, there you go, South Park multiplayer tips. Bit basic but probably helpful back then. This page is a how-to guide for South Park on the N64, right in the middle of the magazine. Classic stuff. It's all about getting good at multiplayer, showing you the ropes on a few of the levels and some of the weapons. Classics. They start off with level tips, like the ravine, which they say is small and good for sneaky attacks. Then there's UFO core, which sounds a bit different with low gravity, and toy store, which is just your typical maze of aisles for running around in. Weapon-wise, they're talking about the sponge dart gun, rapid fire, not too powerful, good for escaping. Then the Terrence and Phillip dolls, those are the farting ones, right? Apparently they can wipe someone out quick with gas clouds. Bit cheeky. Warrington dolls. The super sniper chicken sounds like a laugh, hitting enemies with eggs. The cow launcher is described as South Park's cerebral bore, which is a bit much. Remember cerebral bore from Turok? Classic. But yeah, cows on heads. The warp array has different modes, including shrinking people, and the alien dancing gizmo is like a stun gun that makes people do a 50s dance routine. Mental. $. It's all pretty standard stuff for a multiplayer shooter back then. Run around, grab weapons, try not to get blown up. Good times on the N64, wasn't it? This page is giving you a leg up, apparently. This page in N64 Magazine, right? It's got one of those help wanted boxes in the top left. Always remember seeing those. They were after folks to write game guides, saying they wanted experts. Excellent rewards they reckoned, and yeah, you could get one of those N64 record bags if they printed your guide. Pretty cool back in the day, designed by Will Overton apparently. They even wanted a photo of you too, bit much maybe. K-yeah. Then there's an article called How to Discover Rewarding Little Secrets in the Legend of Zelda. It's all about Ocarina of Time obviously, what else would it be at this point? Written by Thomas McCallend, and it is. He's on about how even if you've done everything in Zelda there's still bits to find. This one is about getting the Hyrule Loach, Warrington the Le. Apparently you need the sinking lure, which you just find randomly, by walking around near the pond. Typical Nintendo randomness that. The Loach is a black eel thing, and really hard to catch. He says nighttime is best, and you need to go to the deep end of the pond. Don't go outside and mess with the day and night cycle, he warns, and cast to get its attention. There's a screenshot of link fishing, to show you what they mean. Down the side, they've got the rules for writing in. Guides should be about 600 words, expert advice and that, back to front knowledge they want. Don't write a guide for the whole game they say, focus on one thing. They mention Thomas has done reviving fairies in Zelda, and Alan has done GoldenEye scenarios in this issue. And don't worry about pictures, their army of art monkeys will sort that out. It's the writing that's important apparently. You had to send your stuff to Help Wanted, N64 Magazine at their Bath address. Remember to put your name and address so they can credit you, and send your record bag. And they say your entry has a better chance if it's a bit different and not too obvious of a game. They don't mind multiplayer guides, but they don't want to run one every month. Good luck, they say. Oh, and good luck indeed. Ah, simpler times, eh? This page right then, it's all about Ocarina of Time, as if we needed more help with that game back in '99, eh? It's got a guide to finding all the fairy fountains, calling them reviving fairy locations. A bit dramatic, but fair enough. Basically, it's telling you to wander around Hyrule with Navi glued to your side, waiting for her to turn green, then whip out your ocarina, and play either the Song of Storms or the Sun's Song. Apparently, there are 12 of these spots dotted all over the shop, from Hyrule Field to Death Mountain, and even that creepy Shadow Temple. They've even got a bit about how to get on top of the castle drawbridge as young Link, using the chains and the Sun's Song. Pretty sneaky trick that was. Remember spending hours trying to find every secret in that game. This page is definitely aiming to help you get your magic power and life energy back up to scratch, which was always handy when you were facing down the likes of Ganon. Good times, good times. This page is all about getting more out of GoldenEye on the N64i, a classic game that just kept giving back then, still does really. It's got a feature called How to Play New GoldenEye Multiplayer Scenarios by Alan Erickson. He reckons even if you've done everything in GoldenEye, there's still more to enjoy with these multiplayer ideas. The first one is called GoldenEye Bases. It's for 2 or 4 players, using remote mines. If you have 4, you can do 2 teams of 2. Basically, each team hides a remote mine somewhere on the level, making sure it's visible, while the other team looks away. You take turns doing this, and the first to blow up the other team's mine wins. Sounds like a laugh, bit sneaky that. Ooh, ooh. Then there's Kill the Giant. This one's for any number of players, the more the merrier apparently. You pick one player to be the giant, and they get boosted health, like plus 10. Everyone else is normal health, and if there's a lot of you, you'll even get health taken away. The idea is just to try and kill the giant. It says it's almost impossible to win as the giant, but a draw is okay. And if the giant does lose, well, you're meant to give them loads of stick for being rubbish. Cheeky. Ah! There are some screenshots from GoldenEye dotted about, showing the action, you know the sort of thing, explosions and blokes running about with guns. Yeah, brings back memories of Friday nights with mates and GoldenEye, good times. This page then, it's from Club 64 Help Wanted. Seems like they're giving us some ideas for multiplayer shenanigans in GoldenEye. Right then, first up is Mr. President. Classic stuff, in it. Needs 3 or more players. One is the president, one is the assassin, and the rest are bodyguards. Simple as you like. Assassin tries to off the president has to survive. They reckon you should tailor the weapons to the characters, so maybe no sniper rifles for the bodyguards if there aren't any in the level naturally. Makes sense? They even suggest trying 2 assassins. Cheeky. Grindcore. Next we've got Guardian of the Golden Gun. Anyone can play this. Again, any weapons. One player is the Guardian, gets a health boost, and sits near the golden gun at the start. They can't grab it once the game begins though, bit of a flaw if you ask me. The others have to try and nick the golden gun and take out the Guardian. Apparently even the golden gun isn't a guaranteed one-hit kill if someone's got body armor, so still a bit of a challenge. Then there's Deadly Snowballs. 2 to 4 players for this one. Weapons are proper Larry. Grenades, grenade launchers or rockets. Level is bunker, naturally. Infinite ammo cheat is on, of course. Who wants to run out of rockets mid-snowball fight? They say set it to license to kill, and have a battle outside in the snow by the helicopter pad. Apparently white characters work best, probably to blend in with the snow. Clever. New. After that it's The Great Escape. 2 or 3 players for this. Weapons anything apart from the really powerful stuff like golden gun, lasers or rockets, fair enough. Level is bunker again. One player is the prisoner, and the others are guards. Prisoner starts in their cell, guards in the control room. Prisoner tries to escape to the helicopter pad. They can nick weapons by slapping guards. Bit of a weird one that. Escaping to the chopper is a proper win, but just killing the prisoner is only a half victory. Seems a bit harsh on the guards, doesn't it? Gee. Lastly we've got Minesweeper. Any number of players. Weapons are proximity mines only. Facility level for this one. Infinite ammo cheat is optional for the mine layer. One player lays the mines in the toilets, and the others wait in there with no weapons. Then they come out and try to get to the mine layer, who's gone to the balcony with the gas canisters after planting the mines. Sounds like a recipe for a right laugh, if a bit one-sided for the mine layer. This page is all about getting better at FIFA 99 on the N64. Classic stuff really. It's got a big title, How to Become Unbeatable at FIFA 99. Right across the middle, in bright yellow and orange, very in your face. There's a bloke kicking a football on the right, looks like an in-game model. Pretty blocky, but, you know, it was 99. Down the side, it mentions it's from N64 Magazine, issue 28. They're talking about their review of FIFA 99 from issue 26, and they gave it 83%. Not bad, eh? They called it the best FIFA yet, but even back then they knew it had stubborn problems. Sounds about right for FIFA back in the day. Then there's a bit of text saying, even though it's under the shadow of IS-98. Yeah, IS-S was king then, wasn't it? FIFA 99 is still supposed to be a good, fast-paced kickabout. They've got challenges to test your skills, written by a bloke called James Price. Fancy yourself a god of FIFA, they ask. Bit much, isn't it? But yeah, they're saying if you do these 12 challenges you'll get better. Good luck with that, eh? Still, takes me back a bit, reading this. This page is all about getting better at FIFA 99, back when that was the footy game to have on the N64. It's got a section on tackling saying there are standing and sliding tackles. Standing is alright up close, but sliding is better for range. Just watch you don't clatter the player instead of the ball, especially if they are trying to do skill moves. For shooting, apparently shooting from near the penalty spot is almost always a goal, which sounds about right, doesn't it? They reckon to look at the formations and cross it in if they've got lots of defenders. Then try for a diving header. Passing is all about being quick on world-class difficulty, no messing about with dribbling as you'll get robbed. The tip is to pass before the ball even gets to your player. A bit of a sneaky trick really, but could work against your mates, especially if they are playing ahead of the camera view. Sounds like they're trying to make you into a right master passer, could score loads of goals apparently. This page in N64 Magazine back in the day was all about getting better at your FIFA skills, well, according to them anyway. It's got a section called the challenges, and they were setting you up with these daft little tasks to improve your game on FIFA. Must have been FIFA 99 this was for. First up, there's possession is 9/10 of the law. The idea is to hog the ball and get over 65% possession in a game. They reckon it'll help your passing and running with the ball. World-class difficulty is the setting they suggest. Their tip is to play it safe at the back, ping it out to the wings, and then whacking crosses for your Shearer-type striker. Difficulty-wise, they've given it 2 footballs, so not too taxing apparently. Next, standing room only, which is all about winning a game without using slide tackles. This is supposed to hone your basic tackling and defensive skills. Again, world-class difficulty, and they suggest Cameroon against Brazil. Their advice is to defend properly, make sure you've always got someone spare at the back, and try to boss the midfield. Another 2 footballs for difficulty. Then there's Braveheart, which is a bit of a laugh. They want you to beat Brazil 50 using Scotland. Yeah, good luck with that. Apparently this will just generally improve your skills, which is helpful. World class again, strict referees, 4-minute match, Scotland versus Brazil of course. They say Scotland aren't terrible, but compared to Brazil? Right. Tip is don't just hoof it upfield, pass it around, and maybe stick 5 men in midfield. They've slapped 4 footballs on this one, getting a bit harder now. Right. Finally, it's a slaughter. Right. This one's just bonkers. Score 10 goals in 4 minutes. They reckon this will improve your speed, reactions and shooting accuracy. Normal game speed, 4-minute match, and the clock stops when the ball goes out. They don't suggest teams, so pick who you want. They say to cut out wing play, and just get the ball to your strikers and try some 1-2s. 5 footballs difficulty rating for this one, no kidding. Warrington Norsa. So yeah, just some silly challenges to mess around with on FIFA back then, probably to keep you busy until the next big game came out. Good times, sort of. This page in N64 Magazine, bless it, is giving us a bit of a leg up for FIFA 99, trying to make us unbeatable, eh? Right then, let's have a butchers. We've got 4 little challenges to get stuck into, all about FIFA skills. Warranty nil. First up is Zilch for the Azzurri, which sounds a bit dramatic for a footy game, doesn't it? Basically, you've got to play as Norway and stop Italy getting a single shot on target. Apparently, this will make you the best defender in the world, or at least in your living room. 4-minute match on World Class, sounds like a right laugh. Then there's the Doron. The Doron. Bit of a mouthful that one. This one's about going through a whole English season as Notts Forest without losing. World Class again, full season, proper test of stamina and skill apparently. They reckon Forest are bottom of the league, so yeah, good luck with that. Warrington Norcrew. Does Jerusalem have a prayer? Is next. Bit deep for FIFA, isn't it? This is about beating AC Milan in a golden goal match using Beitar Jerusalem. Playing for 1 goal on World Class against Milan with Beitar Jerusalem sounds like a proper underdog story, fair play. It's supposed to improve your appreciation of the underdog's lot, well quite. Last one is a kick up the arsene. Cheeky. This is all about beating Arsenal with Tottenham, using a 145 formation. 4-minute match, World Class again, and this is supposed to help you keep the ball and defend against the odds. Apparently Aussie Ardiles would be proud if you can pull it off, which is nice of them to say. So yeah, 4 ways to get better at FIFA 99, according to the mag. Defending, stamina, underdog spirit, and beating Arsenal with Spurs. Classic stuff. This page is a tips page, typical stuff you'd see back in the day in N64 Magazine. It's split into 2 sections, one for Mario Party, and the other for WCW Nitro. Tutorial. For Mario Party, it's got some tips on unlocking stages and items. Apparently if you get through the first 6 stages in Mario Party, buying stuff in the shop and grabbing 1000 coins, you get access to the Magma Mountain stage. There's also a tip about getting 100 stars in Magma Mountain to unlock the Eternal Star stage, and if you complete that you get the end sequence and can buy special shop items. Seems a bit grindy thinking back. There's also something about an alternate title screen if you finish the game with a certain character, and extra songs if you buy a record from the Mushroom Shop. And for easy money, they suggest setting up a 4-player game with CPU opponents, and quitting at the final round, bit cheeky that. Oh, and there's a tip about bumper ball mazes in Minigame Island. You get the first by beating Toad at Slot Car Derby 2, and the second by completing all 50 minigames. Blimey, 50 minigames, in Kazao. Then there's a section for WCW Nitro, the wrestling game. It's all cheat codes basically. One to unlock all wrestlers, bit of a button mashing combo at the title screen, and another to unlock more rings, again, another button combo. They list a load of ring names, places like Graveyard, Spaceship, Circus, Hive, Turbo, all sorts. Wonder if they really made that much difference to the game. Probably just a change of scenery, to be honest. Still, cheat codes were always good for messing around with your mates back then. This page of Club 64 Tips Extra takes me right back. Right then, let's have a butcher's at what we've got here. First up, it's Battletank X. Remember that one? Bit of a laugh with your mates, wasn't it? They've got a bunch of cheat codes here. MSTRSRVV for invincibility, which, let's be honest, who didn't want to be invincible in battle tanks? Then LVFRVR for unlimited lives, PLVRZM for all weapons, LTSFBLLTS for unlimited ammo, and CRSTLCLR for invisibility. Crikey, that's a lot of cheating. And another code for all gangs in campaign mode using LTSLTSGNGS, so you could really mess about with that game. Next, it's FIFA 99. Everyone was playing FIFA back then. They're talking about how to get the Atlanta attack team. Apparently you need to win the Champions Cup as Brazil on professional difficulty. Sounds a bit tricky, to be fair. And then there's something about finding Ronaldo. Apparently he's in the game as Calcio, in the Inter Milan team. Right, good to know if you were a big Ronaldo fan back then, which everyone was, wasn't they? Funju. Then we've got Twisted Edge Snowboarding. Remember this one? Sort of a 1080-degree snowboarding rival, but a bit different. For secret characters, apparently you had to finish first overall on all the difficulty settings in competition mode to unlock Ben, Nieno, TikTok, and Boreth. Never even heard of half of them. And for more boards, they say to finish first on all races to get XXX6, Top Gear Rally, and Midway boards. And the Bucky board for completing the Stunt Challenge mode. Sounds like a lot of effort for a snowboard if you ask me. Oh, and a jump start tip, press forward twice while go is fading. Simple enough. Lastly, it's Wave Race 64. Still looks pretty good even now, doesn't it? They're going on about dolphin riding. Bit bonkers, Wave Race always was. For checkpoint 1 to 2, you need to do a clockwise barrel roll, backflip, and a submarine dive. Sounds complicated, but probably quite fun. Then checkpoint 2 to end, it's an anti-clockwise barrel roll. Apparently if you do all this in Dolphin Park during the championship and hold down on the analog when you choose your character, presto! Dolphins galore. Madness. So yeah, that's the tips page for this month. A bit of everything in there, from cheats to hidden characters to dolphin riding in Wave Race. Good stuff. Makes you want to dig out the old N64, doesn't it? This page is Dr. Kit's Game Clinic, proper retro gaming advice from back in the N64 Magazine days. We've got Tom Kervitz writing in, stuck on mission. Impossible. That CIA escape level where all the doctors are. Dr. Kitz reckons he needs to chat to the nurse, fiddle with some buttons, and then just smash a window to get out. Sounds about right for a stealth mission gone wrong. Ooh. Then there's Joe Young having trouble with Top Gear Overdrive. He wants to use the taco car and race on the space trucking track but can't find it. Dr. Kitz just says, there's no cheat code for that particular track and you've got to play through a whole season to unlock it. Imagine having to actually play a game to unlock stuff back then. Warren's James Hunt's stuck on GoldenEye. Surprise, surprise, Egyptian level, wanting to know how to get the golden gun after bumping off Baron Samedi. Dr. Kitz gives him some instructions about a tile sequence, step forward, left, right, all that jazz. Always was a bit cryptic, Dr. Kitz. And Christopher Middleton is having a mare with Diddy Kong Racing. Can't find the gold key in Smoky Castle, the one with the red dragon. Apparently you have to stop after the drawbridge in Boulder Canyon, turn around, hit a bell, and then use a power-up to jump to a ledge. Sounds like a right faff. There's even little screenshots to remind you what CIA Escape and Diddy Kong Racing looked like. And at the bottom, the got a gaming query bit, just in case you were pulling your hair out over Zelda or something. Ah, simpler times. This page in the N64 Magazine, right? It's all about Zelda Ocarina of Time, which back then was still causing a bit of a headache for some players if the amount of calls to their hotline was anything to go by. They've decided to print some of the most common questions about getting through the third spiritual stone section. Apparently folks were writing in to the magazine asking for help. Proper old school way of doing things, innit? Yeah. So the first question is about finding Zora's domain. Turns out you have to head to the top right corner of Hyrule Field, follow the river from Hyrule Castle until you get to Zora's River, have a chat with the owl again, the bird pops up everywhere, and then navigate across the river and waterfall using Zelda's lullaby to reveal the entrance. Simples, really. Hotaka. Next up, someone's spoken to King Zora about his daughter being kidnapped but is a bit lost on what to do next. The magazine says you need to be able to dive deeper, which you get by winning the diving game from a Zora near King Zora, collect the rupees, get the silver scale, and then you can dive deeper, apparently. Also, Then there's a question about getting into Lord Jabu Jabu's belly. To get in, you need to catch a fish in a bottle. Any shallow water will do. Just stand near the water, use a bottle, and then use the bottled fish in front of Jabu Jabu to feed him. Bit gruesome when you think about it, but hey, it's Zelda. Tukatiti. Finally, someone's found Princess Ruto in Jabu Jabu, but she won't leave. Seems she wants her treasure back. You need to follow her, pick her up, chuck her about a bit, to get to different areas, use the slingshot on a switch, and eventually ride a floating rock to get to a ledge. Classic Zelda puzzle solving that. All in a day's work for young Link, eh? Good times, good times. This page, right then, it's all about the Nintendo hotline, from Club 64 and N64 Magazine. Proper retro this is. It's basically a help service for gamers stuck on their Nintendo games, specifically mentioning they've got experts on staff who know their stuff when it comes to all things Nintendo. In 1999, before everyone had the internet in their pockets, this sort of thing was quite handy, wasn't it? They're even bragging about doubling their staff to answer all the calls, bless them. They've got a section explaining what the hotline actually is for those living under a rock. I suppose saying it's open every day of the year, and you can call them up with your game troubles. They also point out it's not some rip-off premium number, which is good of them. Chilly year. Then there's a bit about sending your questions in by post. Proper old school, in it. You jot your question down and send it in. They'll answer it in the magazine, also they say. Address for posting questions is there for Hotline Zelda, N64 Magazine in Bath. And look at this, now also available. A fancy automated service for those late-night gaming emergencies. Sounds a bit pricey at 50p a minute, mind you, but it's 24 hours and covers the big games. They've even got a different phone number for that, 08916699945, Kiamu. The main bit, though, is the Zelda Ocarina of Time questions. Someone's struggling with the tentacles inside Jabu's belly, asking what to do. The answer is, use the boomerang after you've got it naturally. Another person is stuck after beating the mini-boss in Jabu Jabu, and can't get the door to open, and the hotline tells them to use Ruto and the spiritual stone on a platform. Finally, someone is panicking, because Zelda's been nicked after getting the spiritual stones. Turns out she drops the Ocarina of Time in the moat. You just have to go and pick it up. Simple as that. Apparently it's quite important. Who knew? And using it at the Temple of Time will send you 7 years into the future, blimey. Good old Zelda tips in the magazine, just like the good old days. This page is all about a competition winner, some monstrous creation called Ultra Bovine version 0.1. Apparently, loads of people sent in drawings and designs for mutants, but this Ultra Bovine thing was the best, or at least most memorable. They reckon it's made of paint, paper, and goodness knows what else bits of plastic, even N64 pads and a Time Boy, which was a cheapy handheld console knocking around at the time, and asthma inhalers, which is a bit of a weird touch. Apparently it stank to high heaven too, which is charming. The winner, some bloke called Mr. Rob Pierce from Salisbury, got $1,000 for his troubles. Nice one. It came in its own special box, decorated with stickers, and even had its own adoption papers and care instructions, which is taking it a bit far, isn't it? Corinta. The competition itself was to design a Silicon Valley mutant. The prize was £1,000 to spend on gadgets, which would have been a decent whack back then, and copies of the game Silicon Valley for runners-up. Silicon Valley, that was the DMA design game, later Rockstar North, the Grand Theft Auto lot, wasn't it? Bit of a weird platformer, that one. You could control different animals if I recall. There's a diagram of the Ultra Bovine, and its adoption plan too, like it's some sort of pet. All a bit bonkers really, but I suppose that's what you got in N64 magazine back in the day. This page of the mag features the runners-up in a readers' competition. Looks like folks had to build their own little monster creations. We've got the Master Brain, which is apparently 3 scientists mashed together after a lab accident. Sounds like a right mess, but they reckon it's beautifully constructed, whatever that means. Then there's the Mortar Chicken, a versatile chicken equipped with rubber glove balloons, which is a bit odd, and supposed to be for reaching high platforms. They reckon DMA might want to use it in their next Warped game, which, knowing DMA, probably means it'll be starring in something mental. Next up is the Super Plush Luxury Elephant number 43, complete with an auto ear flapper and a Turdotron. Wears high heels too, naturally. Sounds like proper British eccentricity to me. And finally, Mad Daisy McBurger, a genetically modified Frisian. This one has snot cannons and take-off udders, and a methane propulsion unit. Huzzah! Indeed. Below all that monster madness, there's a bit called What the? About Lee Mail's bonkers creation, which took 7 brightly coloured pages to explain. Blimey. Over on the right, under a big result banner, it's all the highly commended entries from this monster comp. There's a long list of names and their creations. Let's have a butcher's at some of these. Days. Sui Ling Ho made a PlayStation Destroyer Mark 1 bit cheeky calling out Sony on our N64 mag, but alright. James Cobb did a snail tank, which sounds slow. Lynn Westall made a Goldfrog thing, and Hugh Dempsey made a Dungvark, now that's a name. Victoria Hall did a Top B model, and Matthew Finley did a Force, based on Epona from Zelda, horse from Ocarina of Time. Jamie Brooke got commended for exhaustive design documents, sounds like they went a bit overboard. Luke Dabbs made a Sting model, non-musical apparently. Nicola Reed made a She-Devil Sheep variant, Natch. J.M. Withers made a Killer Chicken, clearly chickens are popular this month. There's more. Hugh Edwards made a Pig on a Spring, Craig McGrowan did a Crazy Crosseroo, and Matthew Richards made an armor-plated hedgehog called Spiky. Panada Miranatlumpong made a Flower Baby, which they say is scarier than it sounds. Oh cheers. John Rodenhurst did a Robo-Wasp. Mark Wilding did a Will. Jess and James Mutant, bit of a mouthful. Thomas Reynolds made a PJ Lizard called Hard Hittin', and James Whitehouse did a red-crested Silicon Warrior. James Grounds made a boneless kamikaze monkey project. Right then. Jason Harper made a black hole mole amongst others, and Philip Roberts did stamp collecting Death by Metal. Metal and stamps. An odd combo. Bryn Isaac made a Ninja Rhino. How, they ask. Andrew Groark made a fantastic N64 team-based Mutants, very meta. John Davies made a Wega Monkey Arty. Daniel Boucher did worrying authoritative stables of Mayhem design docs, whatever they are. Ewan McLaughlin made a Stealth Camel, which apparently made them laugh. They're easily amused. Pascal Valentine made a frog with extendable jaws, and Juha Pekka did a wildly armed oddfly. The chap who did the James/car/leopard thing, no name given, and Chris Yates made a bionic crab. Gareth West made a genetically modified soya bean model. Simon Ralph made a monster model, and they hummed a bit this one. Richard Clark made a turtle/elk thing with guns. Failing Cheng made a Tasman, and Rodri Edwards made a wheelie snake, amongst many others. Adi, Adi, Adi. Adi, 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 Adoa. Adi, 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 Adoa. Adi, 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 Ado, Adi, Adi, Adi. They say, the great spider model thing, made out of paper mache. Sorry, the cleaners had it, again. Oh dear. Cleaners striking again. Looks like a right laugh, this whole competition. Good on these folks for getting creative. This page is all about crowning the best gamers out there. Right then. Seems like N64 Mag have been busy sifting through loads of entries from us lot, showing off our skills. First up, it's the Star Performance section, where apparently loads of you have been catching massive fish in games. Must be Zelda. Ocarina of Time, I reckon. Hyrule Loach they're calling it. Two lucky blokes, Chris Ozo and Ruben Larson, bagged themselves a 35-pounder each. Good effort, lads. Whore. Then there's the new high score bit. They asked for fastest times on V-Rally 99 from issue 25, and Jan-Erik Spangberg smashed it with a time of 20 minutes 40 seconds and 12 hundredths of a second. Very precise. He's getting a Macopad 64 pad for his troubles. They also asked for Turok 2 times from issue 26, and Joachim Klauers did it in 17 minutes and 20 seconds. Another joypad for him then. This month's time to beat is all about Rogue Squadron. Apparently loads of people have bought it. They want our times for the Death Star Trench Run and Battle of Hoth bonus levels. Bit cheeky, they want you to get gold medals on all levels to access them normally, or there's a cheat code, DEA DAC, to unlock everything if you're struggling. Right next to that, we've got the GoldenEye 007 fastest agent times. They want video proof only, mind you. There are tables for Caverns, Bunker 2, Control and Cradle levels. Loads of names listed. Richard Dunn seems to be doing pretty well on Caverns and Control, Steven Zwarchis is topping Cradle, and Stelios Giamarellos is quickest on Bunker 2. And finally, there's a Fighter's Destiny fastest timetable, UK PAL version only. Enko Bodis is leading the pack there. Zhu 2. Oh, and there's a shout-out for new Rogue Squadron leagues, wanting times for loads more levels like Ambush at Mos Eisley and Death Star Trench Run again, and Battle of Hoth too, plus some bonus levels. So, plenty to be getting on with this month then, if you're good enough that is. This page from the magazine writes, it's all about getting in touch with other N64 fans, like a proper old-school social media page before social media was even a thing, Kia. First up, we've got the Pen Pal section. Loads of lads and lasses looking for someone to write to about games, music, and just general life. One bloke, Brian Anderson, even gives his full address. Can you imagine doing that now? Mad. Lots of mentions of N64 games, naturally, folks wanting to chat about GoldenEye and that, plus music and motorbikes, all the usual stuff for teenagers back then. Then there's fanzines. Someone's doing a GoldenEye fanzine, the Golden Files. Proper DIY effort that must have been. Remember those? All cut and paste and dodgy photocopies but full of passion. Games to swap is a big chunk. Everyone trying to trade their games. Loads of mentions of the big hitters: F1 World Grand Prix, Banjo-Kazooie, Zelda of course, Mario 64, Turok 2, you name it. FIFA 98 and 99 are in there. And the usual sports games. Seems like everyone wanted to swap for Zelda or Banjo, the classics, eh? Someone's even trying to swap Duke Nukem 64, now that was a bit of alright at the time. A bit grown up. Next. Games to sell. People flogging their stuff for cash. ISS 64, World Cup 98, a few bits and bobs. Prices seem pretty reasonable. 20 quid for ISS 64, 25 for World Cup 98. Someone's selling a job lot of 10 games and 2 controllers for 50 quid. Bargain. Plenty of the same games cropping up again. Banjo, Zelda, Turok, Mario Kart. Seems like everyone was playing the same stuff. Finally, help wanted. Bit more personal this section. Someone called Miss S.A. Easton needs help convincing Peter Brody she loves him. Bless her. And someone else is after anime videos. Bit niche that for a gaming mag. But each to their own. Local. So yeah, that's the page in a nutshell. All about connecting with other gamers, trading games, and the usual classifieds you'd find in the back of a magazine back in the day. Takes you back, doesn't it? This page is all about the N64 being a proper fantastic machine, and they reckon they've got the proof right here. It kicks off by saying, have a look at your games collection, you've definitely got some classics like Super Mario 64, Zelda, Ocarina of Time and GoldenEye. You know, proper genre-defining stuff back then. They're on about those moments in games that really stick with you. Proper jaw-dropping stuff. They're calling it the 20 most gaming mum, which I'm guessing is a typo, and they meant moments. First up, they're banging on about Zelda, Ocarina of Time, and that bit when you walk out of Kokiri Forest and see Hyrule Field for the first time. They've got some screenshots showing Link taking in the view of Hyrule Field and Death Mountain in the distance. They go on about how it was massive, and you trek towards Hyrule Castle and then spot Death Mountain and realize you can actually go there. Bit dramatic, but yeah, it was pretty impressive at the time, seeing that big open space. They call it beautiful and astonishing and all that. Bit over the top maybe, but it was good looking for the time. Then they move on to Super Mario 64, and that moment in Bob-omb Battlefield, when you climb up to the top of the tower. They've got a screenshot of Mario looking down on the level. They are saying it was revolutionary looking down from up there and seeing the whole level, and that it paved the way for Zelda. Bit much, but it was a clever level design, seeing it all laid out like that. They reckon only Nintendo could top it, which is a bit biased, in it. But yeah, both of them were decent games, I suppose. This page then, it's all about jaw-dropping gaming moments and how you can have a go at recreating them yourself. Bit of a laugh that. They're calling it the 20 most jaw-dropping gaming moments. Seems a bit much, doesn't it? Anyway, number 3 on their list is GoldenEye 007. Remember that? Proper classic on the N64. They're banging on about the first level, the dam, and sniping that guard right at the start. Says it's delicious, clinical, precise violence. Bit strong that for shooting a blocky fella in a tunnel, innit? But yeah, sniping in GoldenEye with that sniper rifle was pretty good at the time, had a proper scope and everything. They've even got a how-to bit showing you how to snipe efficiently at home. Turns out it's using a sucker dart gun and shooting your mate in the forehead. Apparently Mr. Weaver, or Mr. Bond as they're calling him, very funny, is showing us how it's done. Says you need a sucker dart gun, darts, and someone with a medium-sized forehead and or buttock cheek. Cheeky. They've got a picture of some poor bloke with darts stuck to his head. Cracking stuff, I suppose. They reckon Rare, who made GoldenEye, have got their work cut out topping that. Good game though, GoldenEye. Proper laugh with your mates. This page from N64 Magazine is having a look back at some of the so-called jaw-dropping moments in gaming. Starting off with Turok 2, they are banging on about the cerebral bore, that weapon that makes heads explode, proper over-the-top stuff, and they seem to be loving it. Then there's Zelda 64, or Ocarina of Time as we all knew it, and they're highlighting the massive boss battles, you know, like King Dodongo and Phantom Ganon, all those big beasties, saying they were something else back then. Proper. Next up is Shadows of the Empire. They're on about the AT-AT bit, where you trip them up like in the Star Wars films. Classic stuff. Then Mario Kart 64 gets a mention for using lightning on Wario Stadium to mess up your mates. A bit cheeky that, but all part of the fun, eh? And lastly, they're talking about Lilac Wars, or Star Fox 64, and that Katina level with all the ships and the big saucer, comparing it to Independence Day, saying it's still good even a couple of years later. Oh, and there's a funny bit about how to race in your living room, with wheelie chairs and steering wheels and dressing up as the village people. Bit daft really, but you know how these mags were back then. They say you need 3 chairs, 3 steering wheels and embarrassing disguises. For a laugh, I suppose. This page is a right trip down memory lane, isn't it? It's all about the 20 most jaw-dropping gaming moments, specifically for the N64. Kicking things off at number 9 is Super Mario 64, and they're on about how mind-blowing it was when you first realized Mario could do more than just jump. The reverse somersault and wall kicks, suddenly the possibilities felt endless, didn't they? They've got a picture of Mario outside Peach's castle. Classic stuff. Next up at number 10 is Wave Race 64, focusing on the walking on water sensation. Remember how good the water effects were? They mention the Southern Island track and the tide uncovering shipwrecks, proper impressive for the time. And still looks alright now actually. They've got a shot of the jet ski racing. Looks fast even in a still image. Number 11 is F-Zero X, with infinite racing. 30 cars on track, face shearing speed, and they mention the X Cup with its random tracks. A bit bonkers really. They call it mind-blowingly fast. And yeah, back then it really was something else. There's a screenshot of the cockpit view with the speedo going crazy fast, proper adrenaline rush even looking at it. They even have a bit saying it's faster than a speeding bullet but much more fun. Corny but true enough. Pilot Wings 64 gets number 12 with View to a Thrill. They reckon the gyrocopter and rocket belt were good, but just gliding as the Birdman over little states at sunset is one of the most calming and exhilarating experiences. Bit flowery language, but it was pretty serene, wasn't it? Screenshot of the Birdman gliding. Quite peaceful looking. Finally, number 13 is GoldenEye 007 with Silence is Golden. Sneaking out of the facility toilets, taking down a guard with a silent shot from the PP7. They're right, that stealth element was pretty new, and very cool, especially compared to run-and-gun shooters we were used to. Screenshot of Bond aiming his PP7 in the toilets. Very sneaky. Lee! And then there's a weird little section called How to Generate G-Forces with some geezer, called Jess in a Mini, trying to recreate the G-force feeling from F-Zero X by using elastic bands. Bit daft really, but I suppose they were trying to be a bit zany. It says something about skin flapping from his face and not being ready for 1000 kmph racing. Right then. Or into BH racing. What you'll need apparently is elastic bands, a fast car or mini, and no police roadblocks. Health and safety gone mad these days, you wouldn't get away with that now, would you? Classic N64 magazine though, a bit of silliness mixed in with the game reviews. This page from what looks like an old N64 mag is running through some of the most supposedly jaw-dropping gaming moments. Right at the top we have Blast Core, and yeah, fair play, smashing everything up with a massive robot was pretty good fun back then. Then there's Banjo-Kazooie, and something about the mechanical shark in Clanker's Cavern, and going inside Clanker himself, which was a bit weird, wasn't it? There's also a daft how-to guide on looking like Banjo and Kazooie with rubber noses. Bit silly, but that's magazines for you. Pacow. Next up is Diddy Kong Racing. They are on about something called Monkey Business and the Adventure Mode, and Treasure Island. I remember that game being alright, a bit childish maybe, even then. And another how-to, this time about body snatching, which seems to be related to Body Harvest, and features some bloke called Tim Weaver, looking a bit menacing to poor old Jess. Bit odd. Finally there's ISSA 98, or International Superstar Soccer 98, they're calling it Over and Shout. It's a football game, and they're on about scoring a cracking overhead kick. Good game that, back in the day, definitely better than the FIFA games at the time, some would say. Down the side, there's an honourable mentions list, so other moments that nearly made the cut. These include the Mario Kart shortcut on Mario Raceway, overtaking Schumacher in an F1 game at Monaco, something about body snatching in Space Station Silicon Valley, the fusion cannon in Turok, a big tank in Body Harvest again, sneaking about in Zelda, racing along the pipe in F-Zero X, flying to the top of the snowman in Banjo-Kazooie, driving the tank in GoldenEye and using the wing cap in Super Mario 64. So just a quick run through of some other decent gaming moments, I suppose, if a bit randomly picked. Yeah, that's the page in a nutshell. This page from N64 Magazine, back when print was king, is having a bit of a laugh at some of gaming's more, shall we say, memorable moments. It kicks off with Turok, Dinosaur Hunter, number 18 in their jaw-dropping countdown, focusing on the bionic Tyrannosaurus. They're proper taking the mickey, calling it the best dinosaur ever, and pant-wetting, you know, the kind of over-the-top praise mags used to do. There's a little screenshot of the Dinoboss and all that. Then it's on to F1 World Grand Prix, number 19. Seems like a James character managed to completely bin it at Monaco, losing both wheels at 130 clicks. They've got a picture of the aftermath, classic pile-up. Typical driving from James, the caption says, with a bit of sarcasm. But they admit it was impressive in a car crash sort of way. Right in the middle, there's a bizarre how-to guide. This time, on breaking a leg. It's clearly a spoof, talking about using coffee filters and plastic beakers to fake an injury, mentioning Mortal Kombat and Team 64 for some reason. Looks like a silly skit with lads pretending to fight, and someone shouting, "Crack!" Very odd. Then number 20 is 1080 snowboarding. Dangerous drop it's called, talking about the Dragon Cave course and launching yourself off a massive drop for a shortcut. Screenshot shows a snowboarder, about to go airborne. Blimming huge drop ahoy, they say. Bit dramatic in it. Over on the right, there's a never again list 10 things they apparently never want to see in games again. Aero gauges, pixel perfect jumps in Turok, Bomberman 64 getting multiplayer wrong, Buck Bumble fogging, MK Mythology's cheap deaths, Clay Fighter being rubbish, Shadows of the Empire jumping, Multi-Racing Championship having only 3 tracks, Penny Racers being slow, and Milo's Astro Lanes being just plain awful. Pretty harsh, but that's mags for you. Finally, there's a section called, "And Now It's Your Turn," where they're asking readers to recreate gaming moments in real life with household stuff and send in photos. Fishing in Zelda, monster slaughtering in Turok 2 and is 98 whatever that is, are mentioned as examples. They even give an address in Bath to send them to, and some daft rules, like Tim, despite his tiny brain, will pick the winner. Standard magazine filler really, but it probably seemed exciting back then. The next page in N64 Magazine is all about what's coming up in the next issue, issue 28 it says down there. Looks like they're previewing this game called Armory Dines, which they reckon is like Turok 2 meets Starship Troopers. Sounds a bit mental, a proper bug-blasting shoot-'em-up. They're calling it violent, which back then was always a selling point, wasn't it? Then there's a tips section for Duke Nukem 0 Hour, promising a complete guide for Duke's best game yet apparently. Bit of a bold claim, but alright. And more Rogue Squadron tips. They were really milking that one, weren't they? Still, good game to be fair. Good. They've reviewed Hybrid Heaven, Konami's sci-fi RPG, saying it's fabulous looking. Remember all the hype around RPGs on the N64? They were still a bit of a novelty really on consoles back then. And finally, Quake 2 is coming next month, they say, to get the lowdown before anyone else. Everyone was still buzzing about Quake back then, so that's definitely a big one. Down the bottom it looks like a sneak peek at the Planet Game Boy section, with Conker's Pocket Tales reviewed and another, tipped, guide for Zelda Link's Awakening. Always good to see the handheld getting some love too. Yeah, typical coming soon page, setting the scene for the next issue, reminding you to go buy it basically. This page is shouting at you right from the start with a massive number 29 for the issue, and claims to be the biggest ever issue at 148 pages, which seems a bit much, even for back then. It's promising even more pics, with glimpses of WWF Attitude, Shadow Man and Mario Golf. Attitude on the N64, that was a bit ropey compared to the PlayStation 1, wasn't it? Shadow Man was properly dark and a bit different, and Mario Golf was always a solid multiplayer choice. The reviewed section highlights Snowboard Kids 2, which was a colourful racer, Michael Owen's Soccer 99, I remember those football games were a dime a dozen, and Mystical Ninja 2, which was a bit of a bonkers action-adventure game with a skeleton dude on fire it seems. Then there's something about a great N64 multiplayer compo, asking if you're good enough to make it to the grand final at London's Virgin Megastore. Sounds like a big deal at the time. They're promising all sorts of things in this issue, like your most dangerous F-Zero tracks ever, which is a bit dramatic, first news on the latest N64 games, tons of new cheats and tips, every Japanese and American game reviewed, and something called Skill Club 64. They reckon they are the only reviews you can trust. Bit cheeky, but they were probably pretty influential back then. And lastly, a free section boasting the best double game guide plus yet, with 2 great guides to 2 huge games, and it shows South Park and double game guide plus yet, double game guide plus yet, double game Warrington 0/S, double game guide plus yet. Those were definitely 2 huge games at the time for different reasons. It's all on sale Tuesday the 18th of May. So yeah, just another packed issue trying to get you to part with your pocket money for the latest N64 buzz. This page then, bit of a giggle this one, it's the What If section, with a game concept called Bill Oddie Harvest. Imagine Pokemon Snap meets birdwatching, but you end up sniping birds, powered by the Body Harvest engine of all things. The reviewer reckons it's Pokemon Snap meets birdwatching, but it sounds properly bonkers, even for back then. Over on the right, you've got the index for issue 28. Core, look at these titles. All-Star Baseball 2000, Carmageddon 64, Command & Conquer on the 64, Duke Nukem, Zero Hour, Harrier 2001 Preview, Harvest Moon Review, remember that one? Quake 2 Preview, Road Rash 64, Shadow Man, Smash Bros, Snowboard Kids 2, Star Wars Episode 1 Racer, and Wipeout 64. Blimey, a proper retro gaming trip. They even had how-to guides and articles on fanzines and retro stuff. Takes you right back.